Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And this is David McCarricker. You're listening to Why Left.
So today on Why Left, we're titling this Message to a Young Theorist. We're going to talk a little bit about if you are somebody out there, you're young, you want to do theory, you're interested in theory, what does that involve? What does that require? How do you go about actually doing that today, given the way the world is? It's not the most hospitable place for theory, and yet we got to do it, don't we?
Mm. Don't we? Or do we? That's part of the question. Do we actually need to? And I kind of want to start off by reading the quote by Rilke that inspired the thumbnail for this stream slash episode, as well as uh, me deeply over the course of the years. I keep going back to his letters to a young poet, an absolutely wonderful piece. Have you read that one, Benjamin?
Yeah, I have. That was given to me some years ago by a former student of mine, actually. That was how I ended up running across it.
Oh, wonderful. So let's pull it up here. There's just a few things that he says throughout this that just like come back to me, and especially over the last 10 years. And there were like moments of burnout when it came to partying, moments of burnout when it came to academia, and moments of burnout when it came to activism. And in all three of those cases, these words got me through hard times. He said, "Be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will find them gradually without noticing it. Live along some. Wait, what? Oh, yeah. He says, perhaps you will find them gradually without noticing it and live along some distant day into the answer." Right? Like you're living into an answer because you're living in the question, is kind of what he's getting at. That was just kind of a funky translation or typo, I think, that I ran into there. But I'm going to skip down to this other part where he says, there is only one thing you should do: go into yourself. Find out the reason that commands you to write. See whether it has spread its roots into the very depths of your heart. Confess to yourself whether you would have to die if you were forbidden to write. This most of all, ask yourself in the most silent hour of your night, must I write? Dig into yourself for a deep answer. And if this answer rings out in assent, if you meet the solemn question with a strong, simple I must, then build your life in accordance with this necessity, your whole life, even into its humblest and most indifferent hour, must become a sign and witness to this impulse. Then come close to nature. Then, as if no one had ever tried before, try to say what you see and feel and love and lose. Now, that's great for poetry, but we're doing something between theory and political theory, something between philosophy and something a little more like critical social theory. So, one of the sort of meta threads we can play with in this episode, and maybe just a little bit now and then more later, is the difference between the struggle and task, method and mode of the poet versus the theorist. And so then I want to say this question: do you have to do theory? Does theory actually matter to you? And if it matters, then why does it matter to you? And then here's the bigger question: what kind of theory? And once you know what kind of theory, then like, how do we even approach it in a time when it's so hard to read and we feel so distracted, and it's the era of post-trust and TMI? TMI, too much information. How to get your basis, how to find your bearings, how to slipstream other people so that you don't have to spend 100 years just to get to the top of that mountain that you're looking at. Anything you'd want to say about that before we dive into this piece, Benjamin?
It's a great point. It is different from art. It has some similarities. When I meet artists, I feel a certain level of kinship with them, but we are not precisely doing the same thing. Theory is not quite the same thing as doing art.
Yeah. Also, I want to say hello to the chat really quick. Remember, folks in the chat, if you're here for the right reasons, you're here to help us make a good production. And so great questions are the ones that are on the wavelength, that understand where we're coming from, that understand what the central or essential concepts, questions, and problems are at Theory Underground. And so you're kind of on the wavelength with us, and then you're asking clarifying questions, keeping workers with earbuds in mind, keeping them in mind. So if you have time to be in the chat, keep those people in mind so that you can ask the clarifying questions they cannot, because they are currently moving things off of conveyor belts and onto pallets at Amazon. Or maybe they're on strike, because I know the Teamsters just went on strike, which is a very small percentage of the Amazon workforce, but it's pretty cool that they're doing that during the Christmas season. I won't be angry at all if my stuff shows up late. How about you, Benjamin?
Oh, no, not at all. Not going to bother me. I'm not
But
so focused on things.
the time is not to boycott Amazon, though, folks. The time is to put in the orders so that they are in a crisis as people do not fulfill the orders because they're on strike. You make the problem worse, actually, which is just better. I mean, I don't know. Do you think it'll do anything to Amazon?
Oof.
Do you think it'll
I
do
don't know.
anything?
It would depend on what percentage of the Amazon workforce is in fact participating. And we do know that when the Teamsters get ready in a quite muscular way to do something, if other people don't help them, if they get caught isolated and alone, then it becomes possible for the government to order them back to work, as we saw in Canada, where Trudeau just ordered the
Mm.
Teamsters to go back to work, and nobody defended their right to strike. Nobody helped them. Nobody did anything. And so even though they were a quite significant force, they got isolated and cornered.
Yeah. And I just have to say, like right now, the cheapest anti-union solution for Bezos and crew is to pull my wife off of the line where she's working and into a small meeting with 5 other people where they talk about what a waste of time and money it would be in a union, and how you got to look out for these people who are talking to you about the union. This happened to her. Anne sat through this meeting, and she said it was surreal. She'd never experienced anything like it. And then when she walked out of the meeting, she was kind of like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like the other workers were like, oh, fuck that shit. And everyone was just kind of like put off by it. Like, what the hell? But it's because people have been leaving some agitprop around. And so, but that's the cheapest solution for them right now. Later, it's rolling out the robots that we've already seen, the ones that can do all the things that she and I were doing in that warehouse. So it's like they have an army of scabs. That's the main point.
Well, and the labor union movement has always driven technological development. And that is I think the strongest argument that can be made for the labor unions is that even if they can't win anything for the workers, they can force these companies to invest in research and development and in technological growth that can have downstream effects that we may struggle to imagine.
So then if Nick Land was a true uh, techno accelerationist, then he would be for labor.
Of course. Of course, if he really wanted to accelerate the technology, he would support labor unions all the time.
You hear that, Nick? If you disagree, you got to come on and talk to us about it. But let's get to it. All right, what are we reading here?
Yeah, so we're going to read a piece that Dave wrote a couple of years back, and he's since edited it a bit, called The Three Principles of Study as a Way of Life. And I'm going to read it, and as I read it, we may have some thoughts. We may discuss a little bit. We may get a little exegetical. I may ask Dave some questions about it. We'll see. We'll see what comes up as we move along. But I will kick us off here. So, though this piece is called The Three Principles of Study as a Way of Life, I, meaning Dave, will be referring to each of the principles as a standard. When spoken of as individual principles, we call them standards because that's what they are, and it sounds better. These three principles are three major reasons why I, meaning Dave, quit Theory Plebe and went underground with Theory Underground. I wasted untold amounts of time over the last 10 years because it was spent drinking and talking about ideas instead of drilling down into concepts and great texts. Along the way, I did succeed at forcing myself to give a few great texts a first pass, taking notes along the way, but these were rare successes against a backdrop of time spent fucking off. Worse, after passing through a great text once, I thought I had read it. My mindset about reading was self-undermining. The academic environment, as well as philosophy groups, did not have accountability or assessment structures that set me, meaning Dave, up for success. The necessity of these three principles has become clear after a decade of struggle. They are what I wish someone had told me on the first day I decided to get serious about philosophy. Theory Underground is meant to create a space where I, meaning Dave, can practice these three principles with others who are also trying to rise to a challenge that is far beyond anything they will be assessed or held accountable for as media influencers or academics in grad school. These three principles are the ones underground theorists must uphold, maintain fidelity to, or at least celebrate and strive toward, if they seek to counter the attention economy and the increasingly lowered standards of academia. So the first of the three is what Dave calls the Bryan standard. Thinking, as opposed to playing out the scripts that echo through one's mind, is based on a lifestyle committed to three fundamental practices: reading, writing, and conversation. Everyone's impulse is to skip steps 1 and 2 to go straight to conversation. But conversation without a basis in the subject matter itself is mere talking, whether at an academic conference or on a platform like Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok. Idle chatter can also be thought of as passing over or passing the word along, as opposed to drilling down into root issues. Such commitment to a subject matter is a prerequisite to rich and educational theoretical discourse, not to mention the examined life itself. Shooting the shit, or just touching on issues, have their place, of course. But the tendency online or in contemporary academia is to stay in this surface mode. Not only is this self-undermining if one's goal is to develop oneself as a thinker, scholar, and theorist, but it can also be self-serving in the careerist sense. The self-serving careerist with no real commitment to the subject matter signals, "I have done the work," which can be good for building social and cultural capital in most theory spaces. But this mode magnetically repulses those who are committed to the longer-term task. Real, substantial conversation with a basis in educational discourse is impossible without fidelity to steps 1 and 2 of the Bryan standard. But what we have been schooled to think of as reading is not enough, which is why we need what's next, the Bert standard. So before we go on to the Bert standard, I just want to make the point that I think this is incredibly important. A lot of people just want a podcast or they want to be influencers, they want to talk, and they do not want to spend time with stuff, or insofar as they do spend time with stuff, they want to rationalize that the superficial time they've spent is sufficient or adequate. So I very much agree with what Dave has to say here with regard to the Bryan standard. It is necessary really to get off the ground at all.
I want to say shout out to Bryan. And, he got this from a professor he really looked up to at University of Washington. And the idea that there's really just three tasks in this scholarly activity: reading, thinking, talking, right? And it being in that order. People might say, well, wait, doesn't thinking always precede the books? And I think if we want to get super theoretical about it, no, because thinking is not something that comes from like your innermost soul first. Like you get language and ideas from others. You've already been reading in a sort of sense. You just haven't been doing it in a deliberate way, right? There's always the book before the thought. And if you, me before theory, when we're talking about a message to a young theorist, me before I ever read any primary texts, and I know a lot of working class people feel the same way, I felt like it would ruin the integrity and authenticity and originality of my thinking to read Plato. What I didn't understand was that my thoughts were footnotes to watered down, distorted ideas from Plato, right? I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
Yeah, people armor themselves against reading by supposing that their experience of the present moment or circumstance has always already given them what they need to be able to do things. And this is because people want to rush into action or they want to rush into a career or they need to rush into a career for economic reasons. And this pressure to rush into a career and find a way to monetize this stuff causes people to rationalize stuff that they shouldn't be rationalizing. I also want to emphasize here, this is quite similar to what we discussed when we were reading through the idea of the monastery, where the monks begin their training in the reading, right? Beginning in the reading, so that you have things to contemplate, to think about.
that
Quite
aren't
similar.
just things that aren't just the algorithmic churn making its way from one ear out the other. Yeah,
Yeah. Or just the things that have been passed around in your particular community, in your particular part of the world, in the social class or situation that you come from. Yeah. Most of the stuff that we think of as special or unique to us when we're 18, 19, 20 is not at all. And one of the things we have to do is humble ourselves a little bit and realize that other people are actual people too. Other people who are living in similar circumstances to us, for the most part, can think a lot of the same things that we can think because they've been exposed to a lot of the same stuff. If you want to think differently and act differently, you actually have to be exposed to different things.
exactly. And Zachary Smith in the chat said, "Damn, let me hear that last passage again." Good thing you can go back and play it forward because we got to get through this thing. But thank you. Thank you for that, Zachary. I'm glad that it's turning on a light bulb for you and for everybody. By the way, there is a poll today. It says, which of the three principles of study as a way of life is the most important? And 100% of the voters so far, only 6 votes, but 100% of them said the Mikey standard. Do you all even know what the Bert or Bryan standards are yet? Well, now you know what the Bryan standard is. It's kind of hard to actually, for me, to separate these standards. That was one of the accomplishments of this piece, was realizing that they are, in fact, different, because Bert, Mikey, and Bryan had all inspired me over the course of years by saying the same things over and over again. And then I was starting to realize, oh, these 3 things, yeah, they go together, but they are different. And so understanding that it brought a lot of clarity to me. But go ahead and make sure to smash like, because this is not popping up for people in their recommendeds if you don't do that. And I forgot to make a poll that encourages you to smash like. So a lot of you think that you did it, but you didn't do it yet. And if you're listening to this from podcast, then I don't know how you support. There might be a like button, but you might just have to comment on it or review the
Rate the
podcast.
podcast. Yeah, review
Yeah,
the podcast. Give it a rating or a review, ideally a nice one. Yes, this is definitely the case. When you break something down into component parts, you're able to see each of the parts more clearly. And then this allows you to understand the thing that they all relate to better because you get a clearer view from each of the different standpoints. When you create multiple standpoints, it helps you understand the unity that you began with better. So by pluralizing, you can then return to the one and you are better off. All
and
right, so
this
let's read
is
the Bert
dialectics.
standard.
All right, let's go.
Reading, as opposed to passively scrolling or gutting a text, is based on a lifestyle committed to 3 steps that are necessary for truly getting to know a theorist, their concepts, or a text. To truly say you have read a great text, you must 1. Do an initial reading of the text to get the lay of the land. 2. Reread to test your own knowledge by seeing if you can rephrase the text in your own terms. And 3. Only after reading a 3rd time, at minimum, compare and contrast it to everything you know. This step demands that one tarry with the negative, meaning examples are not just used to make sense of a concept. If one says, for instance, this text is like X, then more time should be spent writing in a way that also demonstrates why the text is not like X. For example, it is one thing, and very common, to compare something from Heidegger's Being and Time to Taoism or Zen Buddhism. It is one thing to draw a comparison and quite another to rise to the challenge of tearing with the irreconcilable and irreducible differences that make this text and the worldview it is being compared to understandable in terms of its difference. As with the Bryan standard, everyone's impulse is to skip steps one and two and go straight to comparing to everything that comes to mind. But comparison without fidelity to the subject matter on its own terms is self-congratulatory at the same time that it undermines our growth. Obviously, it's fine within reason and even an important part of learning and growing, but we must counter the tendencies at academic conferences or on platforms like Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok. The three steps of the Bert standard obviously raises the bar significantly because we do not have the time energy to have done this in a reasonable amount of time. A reasonable amount of time means taking a break between readings to focus on other things. The stakes are raised even higher by the injunction to only compare and contrast to everything you know. What does it mean to know something? When it comes to great theory texts, it means that one has maintained fidelity to the Bert standard itself. For example, your third reading of Being and Time cannot be compared to the Phenomenology of Spirit or Marx's Das Kapital if you have not first read those 3 times as well. This might feel overwhelming. Good. Theory is a lifelong challenge. Great theory is usually written in one's later years. It is not something you do within your first few years of philosophy so as to jumpstart your media career. The desire to
Mm,
be some kind of prodigy and make it big in academia or on a platform like YouTube or Instagram must be curbed. Everything about the attention economy leaves us feeling the need to put out content faster than should be possible if we are drilling deep into texts and working tirelessly to understand concepts in ways that make them relevant to our lives. To live and breathe a field requires routine effort and sacrifice, which is why it gets called a discipline. If we skip steps one and two to the Bryan standard, then we will have also obviously skipped steps one and two of the Bert standard. If you have not established a track record that gives others just cause to think you have been putting in this work and living up to these ideals, then others will rightfully doubt that you have put sufficient time into learning theory. There are 3 ways of showing others that you have sacrificed the necessary effort to obtain a reasonable level of familiarity or even mastery with a concept, thinker, or text. 1. To literally be seen doing your first and second readings over the course of a decade. 2. To talk with 2 to 3 others who have also just done the reading. Andrew and Nick of the Quavoy channel have been doing this after their first passes of Lacan's seminars. And 3, to write in a way that rises to the challenge imposed on us by the formidable Mikey standard. Both the Bryan and Bert standards are good, but they are insufficient for whipping ourselves into shape without the Mikey standard. And
mm,
before we proceed on to the Mikey standard, I want to say that one of the things that made a huge difference for me in my PhD was to be told that comparing is all well and good, but what's different?
right.
That was what my supervisor, David Runciman, told me very early in my PhD that made a huge difference for me. When I started my PhD, I was very keen to just compare the contemporary crisis to previous historical periods. And he says, well, that is not a way of understanding it on its own terms. It's really not, unless you focus on what's different as well. If you don't focus on what's different, then it's a way of not thinking about the present moment. You draw an analogy, you liken it to something else so that you can treat it as if it always already were that something else. And then you just
Exactly.
apply what you think about
Exactly.
the historical period thoughtlessly to what's going on now. And this is, as you say, incredibly common, not just in the world of TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, but also in academic conferences. There are so many academic conferences that are focused on which historical analogy is the appropriate comparison point. Which one is this like? And it's, how can we avoid having to think about this by drawing a quick analogy? It is incredibly, incredibly common, even among people who think of themselves and are thought of by others as quite well educated. So I very
Mm.
much appreciate this point, Dave. I think it's very important.
It comes up for us because we all did it. It is a necessary sort of rite of passage to feel so excited to be spotting patterns between fields and texts. And then the point is like to break out of that. I always think of like the Batman slapping Robin meme, right? And Robin would be saying something like, "Oh, so and so said that. That's like, and then Batman would slap, and that's Mikey saying, "But what's different? But what's different?" And it's just like, I think this is what Hegel is critiquing Fichte for when he says it's the night that all cows are black, right? It's a famous passage from the preface to the phenomenology. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I started listening to Mikey's libido talk in preparation for writing something hopefully in response to it, or something that it produces in me. And I love how Mikey does do this. He takes a concept like libido and goes, well, what does it mean for this French theorist? And what does it mean for that French theorist? And he is forensic. He doesn't
Mm,
just say, oh, it means the same thing for all of them. No, no,
mm,
no. And that is so tricky. When I was an undergrad, when I was 18, I was drawn to Hobbes, I was drawn to Marx, and I was drawn to Plato. And I treated them initially as if they all were really talking about the same things and they all basically agreed and they all basically had my own view. Part of maturing is to go, no, they don't all agree and they don't all have my own view. I might take inspiration from all of them in various ways, but I have to acknowledge how they're different. And then if I want to deal with those differences, I have to actually work through them. And that is an enormous undertaking. And it's not something that you can just skip past and go, but come on, I like my reading. Wham. That doesn't work. So
yeah. It
this
would
is a
be
great
easy,
piece. It makes me think of very important things.
especially with uh, being in time versus Das Kapital for me. Like, this is such a huge undertaking. And like, there are these points where it's like they're getting at something that is the same and they're using completely different language for it. And those moments are so exciting. But there are these irreconcilable, sort of fathomless abysses between their projects that also have to be tarried with. I can't just go, well, no, this is what I want to do. I'll just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's press on into the
The
Mikey
Mikey
standard.
standard.
Even Mikey has not mastered the Mikey standard, but it is the challenge imposed on all of his effort sacrificed to the work of theory. He did not coin this term himself, which would have been annoying and overbearingly braggadocious. Rather, Bryan, long before I coined the Bryan standard, coined the Mikey standard as a way of describing this seemingly impossible standard that Mikey forces himself to rise to. As with the previous two principles, this standard for writing or speaking about theory holds oneself to three rules. Explain one concept at a time without using other concepts or jargon or outside references, like name dropping, to make sense of the concept in your own words, which will, two, assume an audience that is uninitiated to the discourse or questions in play. As Mikey says, if I can't explain it to that guy at the bar, then I don't understand it myself. Three, use multiple examples for each concept, not just comparing, but more importantly, contrasting. This step demands that one tarry with the negative, meaning examples are not just used to make sense of a concept. If one uses an analogy to say this concept is like X, then more time should be spent writing in a way that also demonstrates why the concept is not like X. Oh, I love it. An example of prioritizing contrast over simple similarity. It is common to see influencers on Theory Instagram say things like Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the body without organs was invented by Lacan because Lacan in Seminar 1 said that the self is an egg. Not only is this factually misleading for people trying to understand the fundamental differences between D and G and Lacan, but the subject of enunciation signals, I have read these two enough to make such authoritative statements. How much hubris is really involved in such statements? And how much more productive is it if we instead prioritize contrast over simple comparison? To answer that question, I will show a piece of Mikey's unpublished writing. Be advised, this is not in any way upholding himself to steps 1 or 2 of the Mikey standard, because it is for a special piece addressed to me meaning Dave. The special piece addressed to me, meaning Dave, assumes that I have already read and reread his articles, the blog posts where he did uphold himself to steps 1 and 2 of the Mikey standard. So what follows is not a demonstration of all the steps of the Mikey standard, for which you should read his post on object petit a or the phallus, but is instead simply an example of step 3, i.e., how much more productive it is to think about the differences between thinkers instead of just similarities. Quote, Lacan himself once spoke of an egg, but his egg was not that of Deleuze. About the ego, Lacan said, the ego is on the one hand like an empty egg, differentiated at its surface through contact with the world of perception. But it is also, each time we encounter it, that which says no or me, I, which says one, which speaks about others, which expresses itself in different registers. Seminar 1, Freud's Papers on Technique, page 3. But let's be very clear here. Lacan did not say that the ego is an egg. He said that it is like an empty egg. His point, of course, is that beneath the surface level of the visual perceptions, images, that comprise one's imaginary identifications, there is a void, a hollowed out absence, a radical negativity. Lacan spoke of the ego being similar to an empty egg because the ego provides the lacking negative subject with an illusory sense of positive wholeness, a misrecognition, or méconnaissance that begins in the mirror stage. The images of eggs, circles, globes, or spheres are often taken to be the ideal representations of wholeness and completeness. The huge problem with the empty egg is the ego, is that it's ultimately a wholed wholeness, to borrow Todd McGowan's term. The ego is imaginary in two key senses. One, the ego is an imaginary, make-believe wholeness, comprised of two perceptual or phantasmatic images that are not the negative subject. In other words, there is no substantial self with positive determinations, but rather a negative subject of desire and lack. This empty egg is nothing like Deleuze's egg, comprised of a wellspring of virtual potentials. These eggs, empty egg versus full egg, have two entirely different ontologies underpinning them. The same holds true for the distinction between the object petit a and the BWO. No grand synthesis between them is possible due to the fact that they have diametrically opposed ontologies. Their theories of desire and drive are anchored in different ontologies, which of course ultimately makes their theories of desire and drive unreconcilable. An ontology of contradiction, or extimate splitness, is not compatible with an ontology of difference or productive assemblage. One has to choose between them. Did Lacan's egg inspire Deleuze's egg? I don't know and I don't care. What matters to me is that they are as conceptually distinct as they can be. I do, however, appreciate the way Dave McCarricker imaginatively explored the possibility of Lacan's egg inspiring D&Gs. As Dave offhandedly remarked as he pictured this scenario, quote, D&G were sitting there at Seminar 1 doing acid, and so that shit mind melded into some shit they heard our Todd say, and boom, we now have the BWO. Ha! In Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari made no sharp distinction between industrial production and natural production, but instead saw them both machinic productive processes within the process, becoming. The process is one univocal, seamless production of new things. In A Thousand Plateaus, the BWO is a full egg. And finally, in Pure Immanence, Deleuze asserts that events and singularities are lacking in nothing. Despite the extreme complicity and difficulty of his writing, his point is very clear and simple. Reality itself is not ontologically constituted in relation to negativity. The negative is merely the project of how we think about things. That is, negativity is the cotton fruit of representation. This is why Deleuze was always quick to attack representation or, quote, the dogmatic image of thought. But from a Hegelian, Lacanian, Žižekian perspective, Deleuze's metaphysics amounts to the assertion that, quote, nature does not exist, i.e., that the universe, as a living plenitude, an ontological whole, a joyful process, in Lacanian terms, Deleuze believed that there is a sexual relation. Deleuze's egg lacks only
Wait, oh,
lack itself.
sorry. Oh, it's just in case anyone's tracking the actual idea here. I mean, as long as you
Yeah.
pick up the main point that he's drawing out this contrast, that's all that really matters, everybody. If you're lost in the sauce, it's okay. But you had read nature does not exist, but it is actually nature does exist. Deleuze's metaphysics amounts to the assertion that nature does exist. Just making sure we got that.
Oh, wow. Sorry for inserting that negative there.
Yeah.
Yes, amounts to the assertion that nature does exist. My apologies, guys. Okay, so I'll pick back up with Deleuze's egg. Deleuze's egg, not leg. Deleuze's egg lacks only lack itself. It is a wellspring of positive and differential potentials that are never inconsistent, antagonistic, or contradict. Deleuze's cosmic egg is an unbarred big other. For us Lacanians, however, there is no unbarred big other, and there is no sexual relation. In true Lacanian fashion, Zizek likes to say, nature does not exist. This formulation refers to the incompleteness of nature or being itself. The egg is always already a cracked egg. Being itself is constitutively fractured by the extimate real. The real is the radical other of being itself, but also constitutes its negative kernel. The real is either internal or external to being, but is extimate. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, as Dave is saying, the key point in Dave referring to this is that the sharp distinction that's being drawn between the way for Mikey Deleuze is talking about this and the way Lacan is talking about this, which cashes out in entirely different attitudes to nature. Is nature a complete unitary whole or is it not? Is it something contradictory? That's a quite sharp difference. And that's really what this paragraph this couple of paragraphs is about.
Fun little factoid. I'm not going to name names because it doesn't matter. But back in the Theorygram days, there was a person who had a huge following and would often kind of like downplay and dismiss stuff we were doing and didn't really care for it. Was way more Deleuzian than Lacanian, and then would always just be like, "Oh well, Hegel's just saying this, Deleuze, which Deleuze does better. Lacan's just saying this, which Deleuze does." And then when that person said, "Oh well," and they draw this comparison with the egg, and they were trying to say it's the same thing between Lacan and Deleuze. That's where Mikey kicked into this mode, wrote this out. That person, like, I'm pretty sure like a month later was like anti-Lacan, anti-Hegel. And then I think another month later was like kind of over theory altogether. And it was like, and it's just like, look, I mean, I don't know if that has anything to do with this as a response to that or anything. But it's like, it's the psychedelic Babel schizo posting kind of effect that is very prevalent on Theorygram. If you know what I mean, then you know what it is. But most of what they do is theory poetry, which might be a really good sort of accelerator. I'm not saying it's bad. It might be a good accelerator for getting your thoughts in order. And it definitely feels good to poetically just use a bunch of concepts that you're picking up. But if you're not getting down to what those concepts are, how they relate, and how they are not saying the same things, then like you're not doing the next step. And so it's just like, are you aware of that? You know,
Well,
that's the point.
this is to do with the difference between art and theory, which is that art ultimately prioritizes the aesthetic over other things like the political or the ethical or the metaphysical, right? Art ultimately, it has to prioritize the aesthetic, even if it compromises to some degree these other things, which is the danger in art as a mimetic field of play, which both cares about and doesn't care about the things that it discusses.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Anyway, I'll pick back up. Wow, thanks, Mikey. See how much more productive it is to focus on tearing with the negative by fleshing out irreducible contradictions between thinkers instead of merely reaching for authoritative performances of synthesis. Your theoretical essays or blog posts should not be styled as, or motivated by goals of, hot takes, timely interventions, or fundamental contributions to the field you are initiating into. Your essays and blog posts should be written in a spirit of the student mindset, the one who seeks to clarify and understand before asking for the critical assessment of others. Before you ever start a blog to post up some theory take, you should first be posting reviews and first stabs at articulating the significance and function of single concepts. Practicing the Mikey standard comes first. Declare yourself a student making an attempt, and you will be evaluated as such. Declaring yourself as a master who can write in the Mikey standard before others have given you this title is both annoying and hubris. Do the former, and people will say, "This is a great first attempt. Let's talk about its strengths and weaknesses." Doing the latter, though, will result in getting silently ostracized by the more serious students, or it could even result in being made an example of or rebuked by someone who is fed up. Pitch yourself at the level that you're at, and people will be more patient with you. It's a good point.
And
Self-awareness. All
I
virtue
I
begins in
I
self-awareness.
this is probably Thank you. Yeah, all virtue begins with self-awareness is a really great point. And that's kind of what I wanted to say is this piece opens with a preamble that I added later about how this is all self-criticism, as well as, I
Mm.
mean, really, what do I mean by self-criticism? Not this Maoist bullshit. It's no, I literally mean like a letter to my younger self, like what I wish I had known previously. That's what I
Now,
mean.
one of the things that's great about Dave is that Dave recognizes himself as a stultified person who has not been able to fully develop because of the conditions under which his possibilities have been, in various ways, limited to this point. So Dave is not at all claiming that he has, the truth or the mastery. Rather, he is on this journey. And I'm on this journey, Mikey's on this journey, and you can journey with us. That's very different from us telling you what the truth is and you know, going, yeah, yeah, sure, sure. The aim here, when I teach my course, the aim will be to familiarize you with lots of different distinct traditions, different distinct ways of thinking about political theory, so that you can begin to orient and develop your view of how you think these things ought to be related to one another. It's not to tell you how to think about politics.
Mm,
I will not, in the course I will be teaching, telling you what I think, really at all. I will just be sharing with you these different traditions and thinkers that I've spent time with. And that's if you look at what Mikey does, so much of it is about taking these different thinkers that he spent time with and sharing them with you. It's not about telling you how you must think about these things, because that would not be inviting you to be, fully part of it. That would be trying to make an acolyte of you. That's
mm,
not what Theory Underground is about.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great
All
point.
right, so
Great point.
I'll pick back up. These principles are hard, so here are some tactics you might employ. These principles are so difficult because once theory and philosophy clicks for anyone, it unlocks what seem like new ideas. As with the examples given in step 3 of both the Bert and Mikey standards, these ideas are usually not, in fact, new. In Psychology 101, you might learn what advertisers know. It takes, on average, seeing something 7 to 9 times before you notice it consciously. So when a person says, "Oh my God, the algorithm is getting so good," or "My phone is spying on me because I was talking about something yesterday and now I saw it advertised on my timeline," they reveal themselves as taking their egoic experience as the master. But for those of us who have learned to think in terms of split subjectivity, there is no reason to believe that our original ideas are indeed so original. Of course, these new ideas feel like deep insights once they click. That is why the freshman who's getting excited about a philosophy course raises their hand so often to draw connections to what they are learning. Drawing connections is good, but because we tend to skip the contrast step, most people finish their studies of a philosopher or text by having an ambiguous notion of how that text or thinker is like X. The point is not to stop ourselves from comparing, but to counteract the impulse to talk about comparisons as if they were profound. Write it out for yourself first, and then put that on cooldowns. The opposite of the fuck it button. Put impulses on cooldown. Writing out your attempt at an interpretation of a text or talking about a concept in your own words is scary. Instead of facing this fear and pushing the fuck it button, the goal is to put our utmost into reviews, exegeses, or essays from the position of humility that aims to understand more than impress. The impulse to compare is the conscious side of the unconscious tendency to flee the task at hand. This is why, without the Mikey standard, Bert standard, and Bryan standard, people like me, meaning Dave, fail to rise to the challenge imposed by theory. Actually, people like me, meaning me too. If the fuck it button is a solution to shyness and cowardice, the cool down button is meant to apply to the impulsive associations and connections that pop into your head while listening to a lecture or reading a great text. We do not deny ourselves the thought of the connection, but we don't engage in idle chatter, free association, or questions that derail the course of the lecture or text. Instead, to put something that feels impulsive on cooldown, you simply write it for yourself privately and then set it aside so that you can go back to focusing on what is at hand. Focusing on what is at hand is the most difficult part of the process for so many of us subjectivized by the carrots and sticks of the so-called attention economy. Those knee-jerk thoughts are inherently worthwhile to write down and return to later once the impulse to share has cooled down. That impulse is strong in most sophomores, though of course most women and some men are less likely to risk following through on the impulse. They are wiser than people like me, who feel the need to pop off every time a connection comes to mind. Maturity is not realizing you just need to fake it till you make it to overcome imposter syndrome. Maturity is, for the aspiring theorist, fidelity to the three principles. These are meant as an antidote to sophomorism, as an impossible goal and challenge against which we can rise. By trying to obtain this impossible goal, we counter the worst tendencies of the attention economy. A knee-jerk response I could not be more sympathetic to is, "Ain't nobody got time for that." But as I said in Waypoint, to paraphrase, maturity is recognizing that if we truly do not have time, then we certainly do not have time to act like we do not have time. How much more true when it comes to matters of the intellect that not only seek to be based in multiple discourses, but which seek to make a positive impact in one's own life, the lives of others, or for the world. If you are not ready to write at the level of the Mikey standard, if you have not taken on the role of disciplined student for a decade or more, and if you see these above listed standards as worthy goals that will whip you into shape and set you up for success in your mature years as a thinker, then we can go back to the first tactic for demonstrating that you are, in fact, putting in the necessary effort. Besides communicating at the level of the Mikey standard, which required 15 years of serious study for Mikey to reach his relative level of achievement, you first have to put in the work in a way that holds you accountable. Mikey did not need this the same way we do. Before he was forced into wage labor, he was doing philosophy for its own sake and did not have to think about having a presence online. After years of conversation where I was always learning so much, I started to push him to put his thoughts on a blog. It took years to get him to do so, finally, in his late 30s. Even with all that encouragement, he does not just write as a master, but he instead writes in a way that got us to coin the Mikey standard, because it stands in such sharp contrast to the rest of theory writing. If not for the
All
fact that Mikey sees,
all the rest of theory writing. I just really want to emphasize this. I don't think most of the people who watch this channel are fully based and the dangerous may be pilled. And I just really want to drive it home. It's like, if you haven't read his phallus post or his Objet Petit A post or any of those monstrous sort of blog posts, the reason they're books. The reason that they are book length, though, on a blog is in part, I think there might be a lot of reasons, but in part, it's because he doesn't have the credentials or academic training for people to be able to look at him and go, oh yeah, judging off this 2,000 word piece, you definitely know what you're talking about. So then he sets himself to the task of proving that he has spanned the literature, not by showing you an annotated bibliography, not by, a paragraph that kind of references a bunch of the biggest names and their takes on this. No, but by just taking you through quote after quote and just giving you all the context and teasing out these similarities and distinctions and definitions and examples. And it's just a beautiful thing. If you guys don't know, I hope you will.
great point, Dave. All right, I'll pick back up. If not for the fact that Mikey sees no way out of wage labor, and I've been pushing him to do his blog coupled with the Patreon so we can hashtag free Mikey from wage labor, he would still be writing his first major work in silence from the public eye. This is the exact opposite of the self-publishing teenagers on Instagram who think themselves genuine peers, initiates, or cutting-edge neo-Nietzscheans after having only read philosophy for a year or two. What is lost here is the period of initiation, of being a student, of studying without recourse to pretenses of mastery or the instrumentalization of theory toward a media project. For those of us who are habitually distracted and untrained in the discipline of thinking in any given field, the first step is a decade-long period of performing the role of student. It is during this time that the first strategy suggested earlier be exercised. Be seen doing your first and second readings over the sustained course of years. In the ideal scenario, you will be seen by multiple professors who have the time energy to assess and evaluate your development. For underground theorists, we have a much more difficult time ahead of us. The goal is not to call out or humiliate those who think they have it all figured out already, but to say, hey, you and me both, friend, have come into theory at a time when we are subjectivized in relation to the attention economy. All the problems of apprenticeship and mastery are still with us today, but now they are worse. Our journey is harder because we often come to philosophical consciousness on the platforms of the attention economy, the algorithmic stage, which is where we also connect with others. Even if this is not the case, our desire and drive is impacted in significant ways by the dynamics and incentives of the attention economy. Because these platforms are profit maximizing and attention extracting in their very nature, distraction is the fundamental symptom of our interest. That is why, at Theory Underground, I've not only been doing routine pep talks about the above listed principles, but have also been experimenting with ways to force myself to focus. The achievement system itself, which to some degree gamifies the structure of Theory Underground, is meant to work within the attention economy by counteracting its worst tendencies with its own tools. Two new methods with which we experiment are time-lapse reading sessions and exegetical readings. Some people insist that gamifying study as a way of life will ruin it. Some people insist that they are not motivated by external rewards or validation. I suspect that they have not seriously thought about the implications of split subjectivity to be making such confident assertions about motivation. Speaking for myself, I have spent the better part of my life since my mid-teens saying I am not motivated by external rewards or approval, that I do things for their own sake and would do them without encouragement or potential recognition. These last few years of trying to not participate in the attention economy as much, thwarting my existence online as an influencer, and leaning hard into the student role as opposed to the master, have made me realize how deeply in the grip of the attention economy my subjectivity truly is. When I post a video that breaks the rules of the algorithm and it gets low engagement, I feel that in the pit of my stomach. It is demoralizing. How stupid is that? Incredibly. As an example, I am affected by the things strangers do or do not say. Though I say to each their own and go about my business, acting like I am above the structures in play, they nevertheless have an impact on me. For the last couple of years, the new burning question has been, what are ways to co-opt and counter the most pernicious influences of the attention economy? What are ways that I can use these mediums or tools to build something that will force me to make the most out of my next 5 years of study? I have a lot of tactics and experiments in development, but for now, the three main ones I will recommend are: 1. Strive to live by the three principles above. 2. Instead of resisting the attention economy, use it as an accountability partner, which means 3. Time-lapse record first or refresher readings, and then, and only then, video record or stream the exegetical reading. The order of this last point is crucial. Since the beginning, when I encouraged fellow travelers to do exegetical readings, I've repeatedly said, never do the exegetical reading on your first pass. Twitch and YouTube streamers have made it very normal for us to think that playing a video on the first pass, pausing to respond every couple of seconds, is a legitimate way to do things. While it is good for gaming the algorithm and making people feel like something was accomplished, it is inherently counterproductive. Exegetical reading, by definition, means to stop and put the text into your own words every so often. It's an interpretive attempt to articulate, which, as you will remember from Bert's principle, should be saved for, at minimum, the second reading. To skip the first reading and go straight into exegesis is as counterproductive as skipping reading and writing before conversation. Not only is jumping straight to exegesis without step one of the Bert standard bad for you, but it is a waste of other people's time.
Mm.
One of the advantages to making your exegesis public is that it benefits others. If it is of quality, then your exegesis can serve as reading step 0 from the Bert standard for someone else. Some multitasking worker or distracted gamer somewhere, if not in your own reading cohort presently or in the future, might get the lay of the land and then be able to come back over the text later for themselves. The exegetical reading should be considered our attention economy reward for having first achieved the first pass. That first pass should be one that is dedicated to a serious block of time, taking notes to get the lay of the land and set aside initial impulse thoughts, connections, and to instead problematize one's own understanding. Because you know you will be doing an exegesis, you will feel more responsible, making you better able to problematize passages and ask yourself what is going on. Tearing with that confusion should be done days, if not weeks, before the actual exegetical reading. If you're like me and weeks have passed since the initial reading, your notes will come in very handy, and you will want to return to certain passages with those questions in mind before the exegetical recording or stream begins. If exegetical reading is a good accountability partner that helps your distracted self stay on task, then time-lapse recording your reading session of the first pass will be even more useful. I have found that it helps me focus immensely. Maybe it will work for you as well. Audio interpassive reading is step 0. One essential point. If you also find that listening to a text read aloud by others or a robot reader is useful for giving you a basic familiarity with the lay of the land of a text, then this pass should be considered step 0 of the Bert principle. 0 does not mean it is meaningless. I find it quite useful, but because you are listening while commuting, working out, working, or gaming, you are obviously unable to take notes. Listening will give you enough familiarity to ask better questions and have a basic orientation in the text, as well as help answer the question of whether or when to return to the text for more deliberate study. Sometimes listening is enough to know it is not important to your immediate interests or goals. But if you feel inspired to skip steps 1 and 2 of both the Bert and Bryan principles, then put that impulse on cooldown and make a promise to yourself to return with deeper reading and writing in mind. Conclusion to my moralizing screed. This piece will rub some of you the wrong way. It undoubtedly sounds like a call-out post of sorts. Even now, I am bracing myself for the inevitable, Dave, in essence, you are saying none of us have ever read anything or had a real thought, much less conversation. Yes, but this implicates me first and foremost. As I already said, these principles were a slow and steady dawning realization that, once they hit me, resulted in the abandonment or sublation of previous projects. These principles did not come from the void and are not purely arbitrary. They grew from failed experiments and experiences attempting to do philosophy with others. Their recent formalization feels like a big relief because it finally crystallizes something that has been, until now, a tedious and frustrated coming to conscious, ignited and fueled by the examples of 3 different friends and fellow travelers, Mikey, Bert, and Bryan. Each has, in his own way, made me realize that so much of my time committed to philosophy and the life of the mind was just self-congratulatory bullshit, loving to hear myself talk, feeling like genuine insights and advances were being made when, in fact, it was just tipsy idle chatter and hype for its own sake. This could all be taken as a moralizing screed, if not for the fact that I am not upholding these principles as one applicable for regular people whose interest in theory might be nothing more than a side hobby or passing curiosity. The same is true for anyone trying to achieve excellence in any other domain where mastery is possible. If you want to be a great musician, artist, inventor, or anything else, there are already pronounced norms and expectations that you can choose to live in accordance with. Not everybody needs to be a thinker, scholar, or theorist. I feel the need to develop myself as all 3, but beyond that, I am also forced to be an educator, an organizer. Why forced? Because whatever it is about the way I am, I need lectures to be able to interview lecturers and to also feel responsible for giving lectures of my own, or else I constantly backslide into ambiguity, non-committal curiosity, and chitter-chatter. Theory Underground is not for everybody. It's not even for most people. It's for people like me, working class fuck-ups and burnouts who see no future in existing institutions, but who nonetheless want to, for however long, take thinking, reading, and conversation to another level. More importantly, we are obsessives, which means that if we were not killing ourselves with impossible standards, difficult texts, and profound concepts from the history of thought, then we would be killing ourselves in more harmful ways. Theory is a hell of a drug. People like me and Mikey are concept dealers, and yes, we do get high on our own supply. The issue is that worldview salesmen, sophists, and influencers who have always been the enemy of philosophy are now celebrated and incentivized more than ever by the attention economy. They have made a nonetheless addicting industry out of cutting the supply. We want it pure. We take pride in dealing the best uncut concepts out there. The 3 principles are simple industry standards meant to counter the watering down of ideas and discourse. These are meant to counter my own worst tendencies. By writing a piece like this, I force myself to become better. This piece is not a call out, it is a call to conscience for people who are tired of sitting on their hands at base camp, who want to start climbing mountains. If you like real challenges, if you are in for the long game, And if you truly want to set yourself up for success in your mature years as a thinker, then this should only serve as motivation, guidance, method, structure, and as a model. After that, there's just Dave's author bio. And I think most of us are pretty familiar with Dave. So I won't read the author bio.
Good job, Benjamin. Good job. You did a really
It
good
was
job
fun.
reading that.
Well, I enjoyed reading it, and that helped me to read it with a little spirit.
Yeah. No, I mean that I think you read it before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so so you did the first pass and this was the exegetical pass. So you've officially done two steps. The third step would be to do the compare contrast critique, you know. And I
Yeah, that would be for us to like sit there and put this next to the idea of a monastery and see exactly how much it overlaps.
yeah. Yeah, and I also have a big critique of this piece that came out of hearing you read it in the context of why I left, because this podcast is a different phase of my development than when I wrote this. And I, I, I had not come to terms yet with the fact that the activism and partying and academic parts of me that had burnt out were still like being sublated in the process of becoming that is TU, right? Like, so I hadn't come to terms with the fact that how to say this, that this is not about theory. Like, I guess that this if you were to read this piece, it would sound like all we're doing is theory and trying to do theory better. And what's missing is that the piece itself is a piece of theorizing the conditions of possibility for action and practice itself. So it's like thinking and theorizing versus action and praxis. Okay, and I'm like focusing on theory and I've bracketed out action and praxis, but in reality, the writing this out is an act of praxis that strives to lay the conditions of possibility for the theorizing in the first place. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, theory and practice, when they're done correctly, come together, right? And that's, for me, that's what theurgy is about. Theurgy is about reaching the stage in the theory where it's actually ready to inform the practice, which comes at the very, very end, right? And the thing that people do is they're always wanting to jump to that informing the practice before they've appropriately handled it. In part because things seem to be changing so quickly. There seems to be a real, need for haste. Things seem to be
It
getting
does.
bad. And so
It does.
people want to find a way of acting right away. But if you don't have the theoretical basis for that, then it just becomes image making. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
goes on the social media. That's what goes on often at academic conferences. A lot of image making that doesn't actually grasp anything and doesn't lead anywhere.
Hmm. I think
And
that's a
often
perfect.
it leads somewhere bad, actually. It's not just that it doesn't lead anywhere, it often leads somewhere bad. It leads to people doing things that hurt other people
Right.
and make the situation worse. All of this chattering that people are doing gets everybody lost, and it causes people to get angry and upset and then to take that out on various people around them.
Mm.
It's not just that the image making doesn't lead anywhere, it's that it leads somewhere evil. Image making is evil. That's why it's sorcery for Yamblichus.
I wanna see you take on image making in Eros. Like you've kind of in the last month, well, since TUCon, at TUCon, I think you said we need agape, not Eros. And I was like, oh, that's a challenge. That is a stake in this, a line in the sand or something. You know what I mean? It's like, but I think I'm on board. I want to follow your thought out on that. That's why I told you got to listen to Mikey's piece on libido. I want you to think about what does Plato have to say to Lacan. Like I cannot wait to see that. So, but folks, we'll come right back in part 2 with something that will hopefully bring a little bit of relief Because if this all feels very overwhelming because you're structurally stultified from having your time energy, you do not have the large, reliable, energy-infused blocks of time between yourself and others. If you do not have that, then you hear this and you say, well, there's no possibility for me. I can only listen to robot readers speed reading pieces of text. I can only listen to podcasts. I'm stretched out across the medium, and this is how I cheat against Jeff Bezos. This is how I get a little bit of my brains back, but there's no way that I can actually read the kinds of texts you're talking about 3 times before having like rich conversations about it with people, especially not with like a period of reflection and writing. There's no way I could ever do that, Dave. How could you do? And you're having this little crisis. Well, some people pick up on the subtle undercurrent or some people read this and were like, you know what? For some reason, I feel relieved. I thought that I would feel overwhelmed, but I feel relieved. Let me know in chat if this was something that made you feel relieved or inspired, but also let me know in chat if it's something that made you feel overwhelmed and like maybe you should quit or you're doing the wrong thing. But don't make a decision on that matter until we're back right after this. Free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon.
But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars. We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's fault line theory, the CCRU versus Ljubljana School, or Žižek versus Land. And of course, how he brings those against one another and then transcends them through other thinkers like Baudrillard, who he'll be teaching an intro course to in 2025. All of us are teaching stuff in 2025 that rhymes or argues or goes together. And so the best way to accelerate your development getting into theory right now is to just become a subscriber at TU. Just go to the website, click get involved, and I'm gonna look, what I'm about to play for you all is a really special moment from our documentary that we're working on, an interview where Benjamin explains why he's supporting Theory Underground and getting involved as a active member here at the core of the teaching team.
Yeah, so the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university, they criticize the left, they don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube, and they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you aren't in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor This idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people. And then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. You have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism, actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced. Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And this is David McCarricker with Why Left?
So now we're going to turn to a different piece by Dave called Hey Kid, What's Your Hurry? And this piece, we thought of it as a kind of a little bit of a aftercare for the previous piece. The previous piece, it is about rigor and it's about standards and getting the standard up. But this piece is about how, hey, you've got time, because unless you're trying to make your living doing theory, you do have time to get a little bit better, a little bit at a time. And this is the advantage that the Amazon worker has over the person who wants to be a media personality. Right. The Amazon worker isn't imagining that theory is going to make money in the next couple of years, but the media personality, the person who goes and does the PhD, they have to figure out a way to actually make that make sense. They have to justify the enormous investment that getting that PhD requires. So it produces a little bit of a different incentive environment. And this piece is about, how actually, if you look at the history of theory, you tend to find that people do their best work in middle age and sometimes in late middle age. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna run through this thing. Dave, anything you want to say before I read it?
For the sake of continuity with the previous episode, for the people who might be just coming in on the stream or episode right now, I don't want to say that you have to go back. Of course, you can if you're interested. The 3 principles for study as a way of life is ultimately about, first, that thinking has 3 components, and that is reading, writing, and talking. And people tend to skip the first 2 steps and go to the third step. And then that there's 3 kinds of readings. Reading to get the lay of the land versus reading to check your assumptions and problematize your interpretation. And then finally, the reading that compares, contrasts, and critiques with other thinkers. People want to skip those 2 steps as well. And then finally, the Mikey standard, which is just like, not do I understand this, but also can I explain it to another person, right? Because otherwise we can get so high on our own supply, we actually are in this sort of ambiguous zone of like, well, do we actually understand what that is? We keep saying it. And that's where this more forensic or analytic kind of rigor that we strive for can come in. Analytic philosophers have a monopoly on that today in the academy, and I resented their slow, piece by piece kind of approach when I was under their tutelage. But I've sort of regretted that attitude since then because of realizing, oh, that's so important. That's so important. That really taking a step at a time, really thinking through the concepts that you're throwing around, saying, oh, am I switching between different orders of existence or different domains of being or different registers of thought? Am I conflating my categories? Like those kinds of questions that we can bring to our work come best from outside, though, right? They come best from supervision, from tutelage, from the tutorial, from the Benjamin Studebaker effect, right? Him reading over your piece and bringing all of it to bear. And so I just wanted to tie a couple threads together, Amazon and Sean. So the thing I want to say about Theory Underground is that it's meant to be ultimately, in the end, something that will serve to take this elite section of the workforce that is working in the most mundane kinds of labor because they crave thinking and they want to reclaim their minds from school and from homework and from PMC jobs, and they just want to move boxes at Amazon and listen to 12-hour MSTUs. And then they're going to, over time, start taking a bunch of notes on the bathroom breaks. And then eventually they'll be able to rise up and not strike in the sense of, there was a time when workers were able to all stand up and say, no, we're not going to do anything, and then everything would shut down. Now they're replaceable by robots. But you know what's not replaceable by robots? Not anytime soon as far as we're concerned. Real thinking. Real thinking that has a grasp on the situation. And though the PMC shills who sat at the front of the classroom and did everything they were told to do and became hall monitors and eventually CEOs of places like United Health, though everything they do can be replaced by AI, what real professions serving real occupations or callings are supposed to do cannot be replaced by AI. And a workforce that can rise up, an elite section of the workforce that can rise up in 5 to 15 years and say, hey guys, the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. We've been studying this stuff for a long time. And now we're at this point where we can actually make real contributions. And so what the hell are they doing? What the hell are they even doing? Right? It's the master-slave dialectic in some kind of a sense, maybe. I don't know. Something like that. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And how do we do that? Well, experiments. And one of the biggest experiments we're so excited about that we're rolling out for 2025, but it starts tomorrow, is the turn. It'll be here on this channel. It'll be public. And Sean is first up for the turn. The 3-hour lecture where I introduce the concept and its other relational organizational concepts is something that subscribers have access to. It's something that's on the Discord. It's sent out through an email. Eventually, everything will be concentrated into the sheet. The sheet is where it's all at. All right? Thanks to Benjamin, we've been having a bunch of business meetings and we're getting it all integrated. So it's going to be very nice and orderly for those of you who do not like trying to find your way in the chaos. And so, yeah, tomorrow, Sean, the turn. Very excited. But basically, it is a part of this process of once you've put a ton of work into something, being able to be like, yeah, let's have a real conversation about it. And then we get to be like, well, from my field, I have a problem with this. And someone else says, well, from my field. And it's going to be stuff that, from your own personal standpoint, you couldn't have preempted because you just don't know what you don't know. And that's part of what we're all doing for each other by working together on things like this. So
it's the benefit of having people who have read different things all together, reading and discussing the same thing. All right, I will start reading this other piece, also, of course, by Dave. Hey, kid, what's your hurry? It's too late to be the next Nietzsche, but with patience, care, and a student's mindset, you could be great. Okay, So what this was going to be was more or less a transcript of something that I spoke from my heart to an IRL audience at Tucon. Instead, the audio file was damaged, and I am instead sitting here writing against a deadline. Oh, okay, so this isn't going to be precisely the thing I heard in Boise. It's going to be a little different. Okay. So you want to be an intellectual. The fact that you are reading this is a great start. Intellectuals read things and reflect on life. But if you're reading this, that might not be enough. Chances are you want to make a serious contribution. Join the club. We all want to make a contribution. What follows is a reminder to myself as much as it is a message to you, dear reader. Pretty much as soon as I got into philosophy, I was instantly convinced I wanted to write my own. I went from never having seriously read nonfiction to thinking I should write my own philosophy in the space of a few months. I'll never forget my freshman self walking up to my professor and asking, "Do you have any tips for me on how to write my own philosophy?" His smile mirrored my excitement, but discouraged me from trying to write my own philosophy. I do not remember what his exact phrasing was, but he more or less said something in the spirit of, "You don't want to do that. If you try to write your own philosophy now, you will neglect the time that you have to give yourself to grow. You want to challenge yourself, interrogate your common sense, and read the greats so that you know you are not just saying something they already said in a more watered down form. You could instead give yourself the time and space to grow, and in doing so, enrich your thought." Before college, I had always taken some kind of pride in my ideas being my own. This meant that if I had a great idea, I thought it was truly mine. But once I started studying philosophy, I quickly realized that few of the ideas I'd ever had were original. They were not just watered down ideas from the greats, but were often watered down versions of ideas the greats had surpassed by leaps and bounds. My professor encouraged me to focus on trying to understand the different thinkers and what they had said, not in isolation, but as part of a millennia-spanning conversation between truth seekers. He said that if I gave myself the time to study and stopped worrying about my philosophy, that my philosophy would grow out of that organically. This advice was easier to take at the time, for the internet was not what it is today, but it would have never occurred to me to build a theory following on YouTube or Instagram. Young thinkers today have new pressures to turn everything they do into some kind of accomplishment that is featured for current and potential followers. The message of the medium in this case is accelerate. Accelerate your career as a thinker. Accelerate building your audience. Accelerate fame, glory, and get those clicks. And why resist? If you feel compelled to produce for the algorithm, why not just convert all your time spent reading philosophy into building up your reputation as a thinker who has a take on every trending issue? Why not build yourself up as an influencer who advances this or that cause, who spends a lot of time focused on this or that thinker or theory? Indeed, why not? I'm not saying all of this is to be avoided. In fact, there's a strong case to be made that this feeling compelled to produce for the algorithm should not be resisted, at least not entirely. In my piece on harnessing versus countering tendencies of the medium, I get into the importance of not always resisting. A tendency of the medium that can be negative on one's development in a certain context or with a certain mentality can be advantageous in a different context once one has developed a different mindset. Whether you build a following or not, the slow growth mentality is the way to go. If you see yourself as a lifelong learner, as someone who is a work in progress, as opposed to a little master or undiscovered great thinker, you will be better able to resist the worst tendencies of the attention economy. Why a Nietzsche 2.0 is impossible today. Young thinkers, especially of the male variety, tend to think they are going to be the next Friedrich Nietzsche. The lore about him makes him seem like the opposite of a slow-growth thinker. No, we are to believe that he was some sort of natural prodigy. Bullshit. Nietzsche was no prodigy. What he was, though, was a kid who got sent to an internationally recognized private education institution at the age of 10 years old. He was at Schalpforta for 10 years, where he became a little polymath. But it's important to point out that he wasn't even the top of his class. He started and ran an art and literature club, made lots of amazing connections, studied subjects most students today don't encounter until college, and did so before going through puberty. Small wonder, then, that Nietzsche was awarded an honorary degree and chair of classical philology at the University of Basel at the age of 24. This is not to say that there was nothing special about him as a person, but if he was born the son of sugarcane farmers, we can be sure his potential would have gone unactualized. Natural prodigy is bullshit. Go read Nance's piece on the homeboy fetish from Underground Theory, or what I've already said about that in Time Energy, or read what Daniel Garner said about that in his piece about time energy. In which volume? Either way, whether we're talking about the stereotypical naturally gifted rapper or basketball player from the hood or an aristocratic rebel like Friedrich Nietzsche, people fetishize the gift without considering the environmental factors, garbage time, and desperation in the former case, the privilege of elite education in the latter. Nietzsche's breakout successes with The Birth of Tragedy got him notoriety at a young age, by his late 20s. His chronic illness led to an inability to hold his university position and forced him into a sort of restless mode of continuous exploration, spending the majority of his average day hiking in the mountains, writing aphoristically. It is doubtful that those aphorisms would have found a market if not for the fact that he had already made a name for himself as the youngest person to ever hold that esteemed university post. We also have to ask, would those aphorisms have had the depth and richness that gives them their staying power if they were simply fired off from his smartphone to a platform like X or Instagram? The uniqueness of what Nietzsche was able to accomplish in his 20s has a lot to do with the historical conditions in which he was writing, the symbolic capital he had acquired before leaving the university, and the time spent in pursuit of beauty and vitality in the fresh air high above the ivory towers and urban industrial acceleration of his time. The point is simply this. We lack Nietzsche's horizon of possibilities because we are in a different historical situation, not to mention class position in the relations of production. For a Nietzsche to be possible, we must first lay the groundwork for what we have taken to calling T3 institutions. We get this from Benjamin Studebaker's 3 Ts, thanks, which are talent, time, energy, and tutelage. T3 institutions help you find your talent and then, having freed up your time energy, connect you with tutors. The point is, we don't have those. Unless you went to an elite school at the age of 10 and spent the next 10 years acquiring the kind of social and cultural capital that brought you the kind of recognition Nietzsche achieved by the age of 24, I'm guessing your 18 to 24-year-old ass is not going to become Nietzsche 2.0. It's already too late. But never mind the Nietzsche route. There is a much more tried and true path for anyone hoping to make an impact. 99% of great philosophical works were written between 40 and 60 years old. All these young guys in academia are out here hustling to make a name in the attention economy, are trying to make a name for themselves as young geniuses now. I already said accelerate is a message of the medium, but the other is now, now, now. Presentism is, I think, the number one tendency that must be resisted. Maybe they are young geniuses, but personally, I don't have time for such people. Not because it's impossible, but because I care more about a process that is only possible if we reject such notions and instead bring back long-lost arts, such as apprenticeship, repetition, and long-term projects. At Theory Underground, we pay close attention to the conditions of possibility for great works, schools of thought, or thinkers who make an impact. One of the necessary, though not sufficient, conditions for making a serious contribution is a life well spent in fidelity to studying the greats that have gone before, writing and involving oneself in serious dialogue via reading and talking with others who have been doing so, and attending lectures and ongoing research seminars. That is a process that the modern university simulates over the course of 4 to 8 years, but all of the greatest thinkers, besides a couple notable exceptions, wrote their most impactful works in their old age. Plato is estimated to have been 50 when he wrote The Republic in 375 BC. Let's skip ahead to Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. He was 57, and then his other two critiques were written at the ages of 64 and 66. How about Hegel's Science of Logic, late 40s and early 50s? So the question is, what's the hurry? We already know what's the hurry. It's the medium, and the fact that everyone in your life asked you, what are you going to be when you grow up, your whole life? And now they wonder why you're wasting your time with theory. We've got something to prove, and the medium is saying to accelerate now. But what's the hurry is the reminder I have to give myself, and I hope that by writing this, you'll find it useful. When I originally presented a talk on this at Tucson, now lost to the annals of time, Tyler Murphy said that he found my argument to be a great relief. I relate. I would like to contribute something amazing to the world of theory, and I have no pretensions that either of my short books are it. No, they are merely waypoints along my journey. Thus, why the first book was called Waypoint, and the second book says that it is just a quick stab that is getting out ahead of the true major work that will come later. The work I need to write, the one I feel called to write, is something I have no intentions of writing until I have the conditions of possibility secured, i.e., my own time energy must be freed from wage labor and busy work, and I will need the mentorship and institutional support to slipstream my way into certain research realms that feel otherwise impenetrable. Theory Underground is the vehicle for getting me there, and hopefully it will help a lot of other people do something similar on their own journeys. So since this "What's the Hurry" discourse is so relieving for me and Tyler, I'm going to go ahead and embellish this piece with a whole table of examples. However, since I don't like how tables work with text-to-speech software, I will not construct a real table, but will, in narrative form, list some major works and the ages of their authors, in no particular order beyond my own immediate preferences. The goal is to be a little exhaustive.
Sorry, lost the spot. There we go. We got it back. Clicked a button by accident. Okay. The goal is to be. Okay.
All right. The goal is to be a little exhaustive. Oh, you do have
sorry.
something.
Yeah, well, since we stopped anyway, I might as well address it. Mills in the chat, who's been getting a lot out of this whole time, he's been here this whole time, said, Tyler was at TUCon? And I just wanted to say, Mills, yes. Not only was Tyler there, Tyler was really awesome to meet and hang out with. And it kind of felt like I already knew him. It was weird. It was like a lot of people there. It was like we've hung out in Zoom calls, but then it's like in person, it was like, oh, you're three-dimensional, but it's you still. And it was just really cool. And it's also neat that he lives within driving distance because he does public events in Montana. And it's like, yeah, I want to go to one of his art events. That's really cool. But anyway, yes, he was there. He had to leave early. There was a big thing that he had. He almost didn't come at all. Then he was like, you know what, Dave, I'm still going to come because it's just too important. I just won't be able to be there for more than half of it, which was really cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, there is a little parasocial dimension to meeting anybody that you've previously only met digitally. You know, even for people like me who have done a lot of podcasting, there is a parasocial dimension.
The most important thing is that people realize Dave's a short little guy. It's okay. I don't think anyone's felt traumatized over it yet, but you know, you got to break the parasociality. Yeah.
Certainly not. You always learn a little something. The way Nina Power likes to put it is, I know what your legs look like. All right. So the goal is to be a little exhaustive to help beat down that part of you that is in such a hurry and to come to the defense of your older self, who you should be looking up to and preparing for success. This list will not include great scientists outside of my own field, mine being Dave's, but I'll give an honorable mention to Charles Darwin, who was 50 when his Origin of Species was published. Neither will I give any attention to great literary authors, besides to point out that Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings between the ages of 45 and 63. Das Kapital, Volume 1, was published when Marx was 49 years old. Thomas Aquinas wrote the Summa Theologica between 1265 and 1274, from the age of 40 to 49. Thomas Hobbes was 63 when his Leviathan was first published in 1651. Augustine of Hippo wrote his Confessions around 397 to 398, when he was in his early 40s, and The City of God when Augustine was in his late 50s to early 60s. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was 50 years old when his The Social Contract was published in 1762. Both an essay concerning human understanding, 1689, and the two treatises of government, 1690, were published when John Locke was in his late 50s. And remember, without this, no labor theory of value, no bourgeois revolutions, no U.S. founding fathers, and no Karl fucking Marx. Heidegger wrote Being in Time before he was ready at the age of 37, after 15 years of intensive study, becoming Husserl's protege, and leading in-depth lecture courses and research seminars. Even Nietzsche was older when he wrote most of his works, not to mention his most important ones. He was 43 when he published On the Genealogy of Morality in 1887. Niccolo Machiavelli likely wrote The Prince around 1513, at the age of around 44. René Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy was first published in 1641. He was around 45 years old at the time. Gilles Deleuze was 55 years old when A Thousand Plateaus was published in 1980. Of course, this is cheating, because he was in his late 20s when he published Difference and Repetition and the Logic of Sense, but I still wanted to bring him in here because A Thousand Plateaus is the more famous work. Shout out to Guattari, who was pretty close in age to Deleuze. Pierre Bourdieu's influential work, Distinction, A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste, was first published in French in 1979 at the age of 49. Simone de Beauvoir was 40 years old when The Second Sex was published in 1949. Lyotard publishes his The Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge, at the age of 54. Some of Michel Foucault's influential works were written in his 30s, but The Order of Things, The Archaeology of Knowledge, and Discipline and Punish were not published until his 40s. Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation was published at the age of 50. Emmanuel Levinas's most important philosophical works were written during his early 40s, Totality and Infinity, to late 50s, Otherwise Than Being or Beyond Essence. Aristotle's major works were likely written between 335 and 323 BC during his second stay in Athens. Historians estimate Aristotle was in his 50s during this period. You may have noticed that the age 40 comes up a lot. Indeed, even Slavoj Žižek did not publish his major breakout work, The Sublime Object of Ideology, until the age of 40. However, it is important to note that his most important work is arguably Less Than Nothing, which was not until the age of 63. Slavoj's favorite psychoanalyst, Jacques Lacan, was 65 years old when his Écrits dropped and became an instant bestseller to everyone's bewilderment. Similarly, Theodore W. Adorno's influential works were between the ages of 44, Dialectic of Enlightenment, and 63, Negative Dialectics. The fact is, philosophy and theory are pursuits that take decades of practice before their payoff is recognizable to many others. The life of the mind is, then, the opposite of physical sports. Star NFL quarterbacks are, on average, 28 years old. Whereas star quarterbacks live out their prime prior to their 40s, star intellectuals usually enter their peak years in their 40s. That golden era usually continues through their 60s if they don't die due to unlucky circumstances. Hannah Arendt is one of my personal favorite thinkers who died before she could complete her major work, The Life of the Mind, which I take to be one of the greatest tragedies in the world of philosophy and theory. The slow growth mindset.
I just want to
Okay,
say,
go
I
for it.
heard, I recently heard an old What's Left episode, the one called Speech Acts with you and Amy, and it's really about a rent. The whole thing turns into a rent, and it's a critique of politics as aesthetics, and so I'm like I'm like I'm like, oh my God, Benjamin's Arendt is not my Arendt. And actually, Benjamin's Arendt brings up all kinds of problems for my Arendt. And so now it's like I have to really go back to her and really think about this. So I just wanted to shout out and draw the connection.
Yeah. For me, she's very much downstream from Aristotle and not necessarily in a good way. But
Mm,
other people are very into her. So it's certainly worth discussing. The Human Condition is, I think,
mhm.
a fascinating work, but I do think it reflects how some of these things are interpreted differently or framed differently in the 20th century versus in Aristotle's time.
I think the conversation we would have to have about the human condition and why I like it as a worker with earbuds trying to become a theorist and all of this is, and at the same time, the reason why I like it would also be a reason to kind of not like her, is it gets us to the heart of this contradiction between elite populism and populist elitism. And almost, I mean, she's almost just justifying slavery and everyone working forever so that a handful of people can just make speech acts. Like I totally get that now. But at the same time,
At
when
least
I'm
with
reading that,
Aristotle, right? At least with Aristotle, it's so a handful of people can live good lives. But
yeah,
with Arendt, that promise is withdrawn and it becomes something less than that.
yeah, public happiness, right? Um, which there's a baby in that bathwater. I want the Lenin enthusiasts to think about it. I want them to think about on revolution for real. But no, like, but also, kind of, it comes to the anti-work versus workerist sort of elite populism, or populist elitism. I'm not sure which is which yet. We have to kind of have that conversation to square it. One is where the elite is using populist rhetoric or thinking that they speak for the people, and the other is where the populace itself is trying to pull itself up by its bootstraps and say, hey, we can read too. Hey, no, this is not a one-way street. And that is the origins of the term populism as a movement in the United States, as I'm sure you know, in the 1870s and 1880s, with the little blue books and the book clubs and the traveling like lectures, and like there was an explosion of like, hey, we don't need these two parties, and black and white people can work together, and the two parties were like torn between, after the Civil War, nursing their wounds and wishing that they could have slaves, and the other side was just like, no, we just want a proletariat, and these workers were like, hey, what if fuck both sides, guys? And that's where like the spirit of American populism kind of comes from. But it's usually remembered for its worst moments and not remembered for its book clubs and lectures, right? Like, which is like the spirit of the thing was, hey, seizing the means of understanding this world.
Yeah, this is the complicated legacy of Protestantism, really, because that's what it is at its core. It's a kind of Protestantism. It's, we can read the book.
But can we?
Right. But can we?
Yeah.
But can we is important. And, what are the conditions for being able to read the book? And can we make those conditions? And, then you start to work through it and you start to get somewhere. All right. The slow growth mindset. Okay, I hope you are now both convinced and encouraged. None of this is to say that there are not notable exceptions. Hume and Schopenhauer were those kinds of exceptions that prove the rule, being between 26 and 30 when their major works were published. Benjamin Studebaker is currently 32, and his second book is coming during the month that I am writing this, November 2024. Maybe this or his Chronic Crisis will prove to be his major work, but I suspect that even Studebaker will not enter his true prime until his 40s. May this be so. May this be so that I write better books in my 40s. I very much hope so. The point is, what are you doing with your time prior to your 40s? Are you setting yourself up to write something amazing by the age of 60 or 63? What would such a life look like? That is what we should be practicing. The slow growth mindset is simply this. See yourself as a work in progress. Love the process, not the destination. Romanticize experiments with the medium and various modes of doing research and writing. Find masters, professors, and favorite thinkers, and then perform the role of loyal student, seeking to best understand the situation without getting them wrong. To close this piece out, I will share 3 things forever frozen in my mind as iconic sort of ideal ego reference points. The first is Karl Marx in the British Museum at seat G7 in the reading room's atrium, most days of the week, studying French socialism, British political economy, and German idealism so that he could critique all 3 inside out for 30 years, from 1850 until he retired. Next is the image of Niccolò Machiavelli putting on his finest clothes to read the greats. As he famously put it, when evening comes, I return home and go into my study. On the threshold, I strip off my muddy, sweaty workday clothes and put on the robes of court and palace. And in this graver dress, I enter the antique courts of the ancients and am welcomed by them. And there I taste the food that alone is mine and for which I was born. And there I make bold to speak to them and ask the motives of their actions. And they in their humanity reply to me. And for the space of 4 hours I forget the world, remember no vexation, fear poverty no more, tremble no more at death. I indeed pass into their world. And finally, Rainer Maria Rilke's advice to a young, aspiring poet is, I think, even more applicable for aspiring philosophers and theorists. It is with his advice that I will close this piece. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Well, I think that was lovely, Dave. Nice work.
Thank you. Yeah. Similar to the speech, but or the presentation, right? But very different. I'm glad I was kind of forced to write it out.
Yeah, I remember bits and bobs of it. I feel like I was there on a first pass that developed into something pretty good.
Cool. So the difference then between the poet and the philosopher is something I kind of want to touch on, and then we can kind of talk a little bit more about harnessing and countering tendencies of the medium and of our schooling, our history of schooling, right? There's all these kinds of neuroses that come from how your libidinal economy formed in the context of a coerced, peer grouped, ranked, sort of collective shaming exercise called the public schooling system, right? You either did really well or it chewed you up and spat you out, haktua. And here you are on the internet. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit, but where do you want to go for now?
Yeah, making me think of a whole story about Chris Catron and David Shields that we don't have time to get into.
The
But
haktua thing?
yes, yes. I immediately think of David Shields whenever anybody says that, and
Okay,
always will,
okay.
I think, until the end of time.
Do we really
Anyway,
not have to? Okay.
we don't have to
No.
get into it now. We don't have to.
Okay.
There's a video on the internet of us at the G-Man Tavern in Chicago, and there's a whole thing about that.
Nice.
Anyway, uh, this point about the difference between artists and theorists, I think it comes back to this: don't just compare but contrast, right? A lot of poetry and a lot of art is about the metaphor or the simile or the allegory. It's about the compare. It's not so much about the contrast.
Right.
That precision, it's not very compatible with the aesthetics of most of the kinds of art that are made. Not to say that necessarily you couldn't do art that would be philosophical in that way or theoretical in that way. I think you can. Helen Rollins has written a book called Psychocinema about how, in her view, this can be done with film. But I think it's harder to do, and it's less commonly done in part because there is this temptation to just relish in the allegory, to just revel in and get a kind of you know erotic joy out of the comparisons.
Is that in that book? Does she go into that?
Uh, not so much necessarily that point, but there is this. Well, maybe actually. I haven't properly read it to prepare to talk about it
Same.
in depth.
Same.
But
I got a copy. She sent me like a digital copy a while back, and I'm really excited about it because
yeah,
thinking
there are
about
a lot of overlaps with some of the things that she would say on the LAC in a lot of our talks, and a lot of this
right.
is about how there is this tendency in film for your symptom to just get reinforced, for this possibility of filling the lack that people imagine is out there for them to be reinforced, and in this way for a logic of capitalism to be reinforced through film, that this is the kind of film that people tend to on an erotic level gravitate toward, something which reinforces their symptom and reinforces their way of getting through capitalism, their way of dealing with it, and that in some ways you have to make films that work against that. And for her, that's fulfilling the true potential of film. That's what film really is meant to be, as opposed to what it's become in capitalism. But I think also you could make a point that art in general tends toward these kinds of mistakes because of the tendency for artists to care more about generating a feeling than necessarily the right feeling.
Mm.
If something is felt, if something feels powerful, And this comes back to the question about drives and loves that we were talking about. I mean, there is a kind of erotic that you can get out of something, but that doesn't necessarily mean it hits other drives or other kinds of love to the same degree or in the same way. And I think a lot of the time, our drives, these different loves that we have conflict with each other. And part of the work of being a person is to decide in discrete situations which one to feed, which wolf do
Mm,
you feed? Is it going to be eros? Is it going to be pragma? Is it going to be philia, storge, agape? Which one are you going to feed today? And that is where this capacity to rule yourself and to make judgments becomes so important. This ability to reason, distinct from just following drive. If you have more than one drive, then there has to be something which enables you to pick which one you follow, right? But if you treat drive all as one thing and then it just becomes human motivation in a kind of big unitary sense, then you're just getting pulled hither and thither by things. And there's
mm,
no possibility of controlling, there's no possibility of actually making decisions. To make a decision is to have some part of you that isn't just reducible to arrows, right? There has to be some part that can say, well, do I do this or not? And if you frame that purely in terms of repression, I think that misses, that you actually can. I think people actually do have reason and can rule themselves. I do think that is something people can do. And if you think that that's something people can do, then there have to be different motivations in play that people can choose among in some way, shape, or form. If they are built or constructed in such a way that they have that capacity, which, different people are to different degrees. Some people, I think, are more conscious of their drives and more able to reflect on, should I really want this thing that I think that I want? Is it good for me to want it? Should I encourage this particular part of myself? And other people are not so able to do that. But I think when you frame the thinking about it and the reasoning about it as just repression, as a way of just dismissing that whole side to life, it produces a less reflective and less conscious subject,
hmm.
which has been the function of a significant amount of, more recent bad, readings of French theory.
Right. And which is the flattening of all of those loves into just one thing. All drives are
Right.
death drive. Yeah.
Yeah, or all drives are eros, or all drives are libido, the flattening of desire, treating everything as just desire, using the word desire to refer to all of it can make it hard for us to make decisions because then what we're going to do is just whatever it is that we're motivated to do. And that's just going to depend on the structure of the libidinal economy at that point, right? That's just going to be a function of how your eros works. And then that's all there is to it. It becomes, you're not a person, you are a desiring machine at that stage. And I think there is a difference between a desiring machine and a person.
I'm typing in the chat. Want to pop in for a guest appearance where you read that highlighted quote to Nance? I know that he might not be able to where he's currently at and what's going on, but also he had said that there's like he's vibing. He's going to see what happens. So the reason I say that is because there's a quote from my book Waypoint, first book Waypoint. Still, it was published under the name Theory Plebe. So it's like I haven't even put out a second edition with my proper name yet because I'm not even ready to revisit that book yet. But there's something about this long-term thinking and the approach with Theory Underground and the sort of directionality to all of this stuff that I want to make sure that we hit on in the last 20 minutes here. And I want to set up getting to it by talking about people who will say something like, one in the chat just said, I'd like to bring theory into the theater, but my theater group is totally perplexed by me. And then I want to point out that what Helen Rollins and William Proudler, who's a member here at TU that we met when we were in the UK, what William Proudler and Helen talked about when we did a special MSTU segment on film is the idea of bringing concepts to life in relatable ways. And really what it becomes is getting a message across. It becomes like how to get this amazing idea to other people. It's like, I'm Moses. I've been to the top of Mount Sinai, but I can't just come down with the tablets. I actually have to do some kind of an art thing or rhetorical thing to get the people at the theater community to kind of get it, or to get the people in the film community to get it. And I think that part of the problem for us, or especially me, I'll talk about myself here, is that this kind of assumes that I, as the thinker, theorist, already know or have already been to the top of Mount Sinai, that I already know what needs to be shared. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be. You raised one problem for bringing it to film. We could talk about the other kinds of problems that will naturally arise if you're trying to theory pill the theater community. But then we
Yeah.
could
I
also
mean, one
talk
point that
about
Helen made,
we could all one last is just to say, but
yeah,
same thing is true with taking time energy and post-class fractured mass and gerrymandering Befindlichkeit and all of these kinds of concepts that we're working with here, and trying to take those to factory workers. Like, just, you got excited and now you're there. Now Mandy is doing that footwork. It's really helping me. Later in Waypoint, I just want to say this is the piece. Later in Waypoint, I say that what I want is people who want to do empirical research, people who are excited to do sociological studies, people who are looking to do psychology research, like people who are in related fields, who want to think about time energy, who are trying to figure out what to do for their thesis. I say, reach out to me. And at the time that I said that, I had not concretized so well certain operating assumptions, like, I'm doing this for workers with earbuds. I'm doing this for myself, in the not too distant past. I'm doing this for myself in the future, once I go back to Amazon intermittently. That is why I didn't even think to say, if you're just wanting to go talk to people just to do street sociology, then reach out to me. I was just thinking, well, who would want to do this kind of work? And I wasn't imagining somebody like Mandy would come several hours to an event in Kansas City, Missouri, to see us do our presentation, and then she would meet her dog, and she'd get excited about the ideas and share her story about burning out on activism. I didn't imagine even then that she was going to take it to the people, right, and actually start interviewing workers. But if she had read what Nance is about to read here on the channel, and I'll still let you say your thing before we get to that, then I think it would. If we had a conversation about what to say to them, it would have been probably different, because there's an esoteric versus exoteric. We're still learning, but we have certain questions, concepts, and problems that we're working on. And then, like, what do you take to the people? How do you, and I love the fuck it button and just get after it, and then let's clean up after the fact. And part of that is just realizing a lot of the stuff that we're saying here on the channel and in the inner circles, it's not ready to go there yet, but it's also not ready to go to film yet. It's also not ready to go to theater yet. But also forcing the issue and then learning from those encounters, that is part of the process. What were you going to say, man?
Yeah, just on the point about art, part of the trouble is that art is not just a propagandistic form of for getting across something else that's prefigured. Art is itself a medium for tearing with things, right? So film shouldn't just be a way of reinforcing your capitalistic drive, but nor can it be a propagandistic way of getting across a preconceived or preconfigured message. It's meant to be something else. But it's difficult for it to be this something else in this capitalist condition in which there's this political economy pressure on it to be the one thing. And then people who want to resist that often want to resist it to try to say something very dogmatic and propagandistic and heavy-handed. And I think we saw a certain amount of that in recent years with some of the culture war stuff surrounding the major film franchises. There are some people who want these films to be fun and to fit into their libidinal modes. And then there are other people who wanted these films to tell you what you ought to think about politics or how you ought to be or where you ought to be at. And therefore the films ought to be, woke, or they ought to be representational in the relevant kind of way. And I think that both of those things miss the potential in film, which Helen is attempting to articulate. Uh, so on the one hand, I said earlier that art doesn't care about theory. I don't think that it's necessarily the case that art doesn't care, but it's that there's lots of other things that are at play when we start talking about art that tend to crowd out or to talk over theory. And so to make art theoretical becomes a difficult task. Whereas when you're just doing the theory, when the theory is explicitly what you're doing, it becomes easier to bracket certain things. But a consequence of this bracketing is that the theory, because it isn't married to some kind of material thing like a film, right? It is harder to bring it into being theurgically in a way that creates a felt experience that can elevate somebody. And so that's the real challenge, is to get to a point with the theory where it actually could inform a film, but not in a way that would be dogmatic, not in a way that would be just trying to tell people what to think, but where it would create an experience that elevates the consciousness of the person who sees the thing. And that's what they were trying to do with New Wave cinema. They were viewing film as potentially a medium for not propagandistically disseminating socialism, but to raise the consciousness of people, actually raise their consciousness, as opposed to the bullshit that people on the left who don't understand what consciousness is are saying when they throw that term around. That's what Godard was trying to do.
Mm.
But yes, there are all these frustrations with a medium like this and with the cost of film. One of the things that Helen and I have often talked about is how expensive it is to make a film, and how this tends to invite capitalism to influence the film to a much greater degree. But there are things you can do in terms of camera technology, in terms of having a really great camera that's on your phone. Could you make a film with your phone? Lower the barriers to entry, and make it possible to do more things with less money. But we could go on and on about this, and I could talk about it a lot. You have something that Nance needs to read, and Nance, I know, is not feeling super well, so I don't want to make Nance wait around.
Welcome to the show, Nance. How's it going, man?
Hey guys, how you doing? Dude, Benjamin, oh my gosh, I want to talk about art with you. That's something you and I have never broached, and I'm loving the conversation you guys are having right now. And like,
cool.
Yeah, like I got ongoing projects, and I'm just like, holy crap, dude. That like, okay, anyway. But yeah, let's read the quote. Hold on, I got to get the book now.
We've got Man Bun Nance from the chat to the screen, ladies. Check it out. He's looking rather good for someone not feeling so well. Look at that.
Are you sure about that, dude? Look at my. I'm like rotting from the inside out, dude.
Are you sure about that?
Okay. Here in this book, Waypoint, on page 21, it's still in the introduction. Dave's words, for those of us finding ourselves here, it is on us to lay the groundwork for those to come. To that end, I am giving myself the next 5 years to develop before writing a very specific book to the parents of the children who will be 25 and 30 years. I will then be writing and developing course materials for those working thinkers and thinking workers who will be 25 and 30 years.
So I kind of want to start before I dive into my thought process there. I kind of want to just, for you guys, how did, like, the first time you heard me articulate that, did it make sense? Did you guys go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I get why Dave's saying that. Or was it kind of like, what the hell are you talking about? And how has that idea grown on you with time, or has it?
I believe that I might understand it. I don't know for certain that my version of it is identical to your version of it. When I read that, it made sense to me why you would say something like that. I can come up with reasons for having that position. Whether they're exactly the same as the reasons you have, though, I would be
Mm,
hesitant to make such a bold claim.
mm-hmm. Well,
Dude,
now,
I think I remember the first time I heard it on the Theory Plebe YouTube broadcast show extravaganza. um and it like struck a chord. I was like, "Oh, this is what I'm looking for." Like I was at this moment of utter disillusionment with politics, and I still kind of am in this moment of like politics aren't real. Um but I tried acting in and on the world, and I tried being involved in structures and organizations, and it didn't work. I didn't get anywhere, and in fact my life was worse for my efforts. Um Nevertheless, I was still called to something. There was still something calling me. And I guess just hearing you put it in those words was like, that's what I want. We need this kind of future oriented thinking, but not in this fetishistic way. We need like multi generational thinking, intergenerational thinking. We need to project ourselves, like not just fetishize the youth and do the kids are the future, because that always becomes bullshit. That always
yeah,
becomes this ideological operation to disavow and sneak bullshit in. But project ourselves as actors, as thinkers, as agents. Like, what is my relation to the future with this work that I'm trying to do, or that I see myself doing? That was, I think, one articulation of that. And I don't know if I've heard anyone else say that. I definitely don't think I had at the time. But that was powerful. And then I was like, oh, time energy and deep work and deep thought and like all these other concepts that were kind of going on. I was like,
mm,
this fucking dude
mm-hmm,
gets it. This dude is building a
mm,
machine.
Yeah, I would be inclined to think about it in terms of middle capitalism as the vast desert, where the political techniques of the past have lost effectiveness, but the political techniques of the future are not yet effective.
mm.
And therefore, if you're in the vast desert, you have to be preparing for when you finally get to the other side of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well said, guys. Well said. Well, do we have the resources? Sorry, I'm blasting up my microphone levels here. Do we have the resources necessary to do the things that we feel that we need to do? And part of this is why I always refer to the old theorists, people like to refer to as our elders, is to kind of point out, well, and I guess it doesn't work without a little extra explaining, but basically, there's an intergenerational breakdown from their standpoint, from the standpoint of a Richard Wolff or a Cornel West or a Michael Parenti or a Rick Roderick or a Wes Cecil or a David Harvey or a Hubert Dreyfus, any of these guys that we love, is in the role of a professor. They belong to a specific, very slim subsection of the human population that understands itself in generational terms. But even within that generation, they see themselves as belonging to a specific grade in a specific year. And so they have peers within that very narrow slice of humanity. And then what they do is for the kids. And the kids is this rotating door that's always between the ages of 18 and 24. There is no real intergenerationality anymore. And there's no institution built around that idea. It's instead the institution, the message of its medium is that rotating door, and you putting yourself off into some corner and just speaking to people within this specific age range. And sure, you have email relationships with them throughout the years. You find out about their accomplishments. And sure, some of them go into graduate work and eventually become peers in some sort of a sense. But I don't relate to any of it. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to me.
And there's lots of these vague Arendtian bullshit appeals to natality of just, well, it's new people, so they can bring in the newness. There's new stuff. It's new. They're new. And there's no actual concrete explanation of, well, in what ways are they new? And how do they actually have new potential? And what if they're regressed subjects relative to the previous set that you had? That wouldn't give you what you might be looking for from them. Who's to say that the young people are always better than the previous young people or always have more potential than the previous young people? Why would we think that? Has the last 50, 60, 70 years in any way indicated that that's the case? Come on.
That wait, are you saying the young aren't the revolutionary subject that will replace the proletariat?
Well, then there's the whole question of professionals and college kids, and are they the students, right? There's a certain notion of what the student is that is operative in this work that I think a lot of people would
100%.
struggle to defend if they actually had to spell it out. So instead, they do vague, the children are our future. And why do they
Mm-hmm.
do that? Because to them, the college student and the children are meant to be identical. All of the children are meant to be college students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's supposed to be a college student. And if everybody gets the college student socialization, then everyone will end up having the right think, and then everybody will do right thing.
Yeah, it
Right.
becomes the teleological perversion. It becomes the yeah.
Have you guys read articles to that effect that say, well, let's just turn the whole world into a campus? Have you guys encountered articles like that?
Well, I mean,
A lot of the time, it's a background assumption that there's just going to be this necessity to expand the educated part of the population indefinitely for economic reasons. That the way to do economic growth is to move to the highly educated service economy where everybody goes to school. And that if you aren't sending as many people to school as possible, this is explicitly the kind of 70s, 80s, the solution to the demise of the factories is education, education, education. That's where that language comes from. And then what's inequality? It's that some people have gotten the education and some people haven't. A lot of people, instead of thinking in terms of the billionaires of the capitalist class, do the 80-20 thing. If you go back 40 years, especially, the 80-20 thing of the 20% who go to college versus the 80 not. And now it's the 60-40 thing rather than the 80-20 thing. But it's this idea that, really you need everybody to go to school. And if that isn't the case, then you won't actually have the cadre that you need to have.
Mm. And then we
I
could
think
talk about brain drain, surplus genius, and the falling professionals. But yeah, what were you going to say, Nance?
I think I started writing a piece called Jameson avec Junger. Was it like 2 years ago? And I think that's my problem with Jameson is that, like, specifically in this case, when we're talking about
wait. Actually, how about you stick around for a little after thing? I know we got to cut Benjamin loose. So let's end this recording with just a couple closing thoughts. Make it 30 seconds each, and hold the phone there for a second, Nance. We'll bring it back to that as a little bonus at the end for people. But really quick, I'll say I wore this hat today with intentionality, and so it's the quilting point. It says read a book. The question is how to read a book and what books and why. And then the pin on this hat from the new Theory Underground merch store, accessible from the website, is the timenergy pin. And the question is the conditions of possibility for being able to read books. And so it's like timenergy and read a book. I do command you. Like, it's like I'm walking around super egoically telling people to do something. But the point is like, if that makes you feel angry, it's good. I'm mad about it too, because I can't either. And we should be able to, God damn it, we should be able to read books, okay? We should be able to live in a world where we get to do that. And I'll just say that I asked you guys, like, as far as I'm giving myself 5 years to write a very specific book to the parents of the children who will be 25 and 30 years. Yes, Nance basically said it all. I'll only add that this is something that brought me tremendous relief once I wrote it down as a rule. Once I gave myself that time, then it makes it so, like, yes, I really can take a breather. Now, do I? No. But I try, and I can remind myself that I do have time during those times when I'm totally overwhelmed. there's a saying, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. But there's also another saying that I like to counter with, which is if it's worth doing, it's worth doing twice. So that's what the first pass is all about. And we aim to give you that here on the free end at TU. And on the back end, if you want to get involved with the supervisions and the turn, well, we'd love to see you subscribe. Any closing thoughts, guys? Gentlemen?
Yeah, sure. TU is ultimately, very much about rigor, actual rigor, which people are constantly telling you that you don't need, so that you won't ask for it, you won't demand it, and so that you can feel good about yourself just as you are. But we are really actually trying to make it possible to think through all the different traditions in human thought. When I do this course that I'm going to be doing, 12 different thinkers, each of which is the jumping off point for a separate and distinct tradition for thinking about political theory. And the goal is not to tell you which ones are good, which ones are bad. It's to just give them to you so that you can begin the process of thinking through all of that for yourself, so that you can arrive at a view about it that is your own view, as opposed to just agreeing with what Benjamin Studebaker thinks. And that is something you're really not going to find anywhere else. The universities are constantly just preparing people for the job coupon. If you want anything more than that, you have to spend an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of money. And even then, you need to get lucky. You need a good supervisor who actually teaches you how to think instead of somebody who teaches you how to parrot them. And that's not a given at all. And it's very difficult to pick a good one. And then on the other side, you've got these sects, you've got these cults that are, I know what is true and let me give you the worldview. This kind of stuff doesn't teach you how to think. This kind of stuff gives you an ersatz of thinking by giving you a dogma that you can cling to as a little raft when you're at sea. That's not being a theorist. That's comfort. And when you're uncomfortable, that's when maybe you have an opportunity to grow and develop. And as we go through all these different thinkers and different traditions, we are looking to become uncomfortable. We are looking to brush up against the limits of what we think is true.
Hell yeah.
Everybody, we'll be back on Monday with How the Left Stole Christmas and Benjamin's special little lecture on love. Merry Christmas, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Also, Nance and I will be back with a little bonus right after this.
Thanks, guys.
What year by the mind and scent?
Chances are you're enjoying it, which means you would maybe like other stuff that Theory Underground publishes. So make sure that you've subscribed and that you click the little bell. It turns out only 40% of people who subscribe click the little bell. But I think that at least 20% of the rest of y'all just don't realize how much pushing the bell really makes a difference, especially considering the fact that at TU, we tend to put stuff out without warning. There's no schedule. This is coming from the space of my freedom. I just do this stuff when I can. And I don't want to live by a schedule because I'm sorry, I've got other things that are supposedly more important. All right. Well, with that said, there's also liking and commenting and subscribing. It obviously makes a difference. If you're one of those people who considers yourself a sort of recluse, well, then maybe don't worry about the commenting, but you can at least click the like button. It does make a difference. Also, if you're listening to this on the podcast, please leave us a favorable review on your favorite platform. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
And we're back, baby. What's up, everybody?
Yo.
It's Dave and Nance in the house. Bow, 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 bow.
What's cracking? Sound the war horn, dude. That's the war horn. Haas and the ACP guys, they have their memes about like going to war. So do we, dude.
Coming
and this is
for
our
you motherfuckers.
Yeah, we're cool and violent and dangerous.
All right. Look, guys, everyone in the chat telling people who to read, I'm going to block you and you'll never be welcome back on this channel. If you're at Theory Underground and if you think you're in the position to be giving reading recommendations, but you don't know what our 5 fundamental concepts, problems, and thinkers are, and you haven't actually done the 3 principles of study as a way of life, and if you're not taking seriously everything that we've covered in this live stream so far, here's the Batman to Robin. There you go. Let's just
check yourself, homie. Chickadee,
Dude.
check yourself, dude.
I've had it with
Methodological. I mean, look, the word humility.
Dude, people feel like there's too many things to read all the time. And then people come along and say, you got to read this thing that I just read. Oh, do you have a school of thought? Do you have a school of thought with like Mikey and Benjamin and Nance and Dave? Like, oh, that's what's going on here. So we just gave you all the nice version in Benjamin's voice. But like, I just want to say, like, 2025 is the year of getting on the wavelength until you can tell me you are certified like on the wavelength and you know where we're coming from and you actually know what all those concepts are. Solowski, you're close, man, but you're still so far off with gerrymandering and Befindlichkeit. There's so much stuff I have to unpack. Don't worry. The big lecture on that is coming soon. It will be public and it will be free. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Nance, but I felt animated and I wanted to say that. But also, don't worry, guys. I'm just going off. I love you. No one's getting blocked. No one's going to get spanked. I'm busting your balls, guys. Okay, that's fun. Hey, it was a joke the whole time. Anyway, but yeah.
So we can walk it back and we can do the human thing, which is necessary. But it is also true. Don't get shit twisted. This is attention, and this is like a methodological point. Like there's a fucking method. Benjamin just said it. Rigor. I've said it hundreds of times at this point. There's a directionality to all of this. This is not just a performance. This is not just sitting around shooting the shit, having a circle jerk. While there may be elements of circle jerkery, it's also, we're headed in a direction. So and look, I'm guilty of it too. Like if I see someone in the chat talking about Lumen and I can see that they actually know what they're talking about, I get excited and I'm like, fuck yeah, because Lumen's one of my guys. Mm-hmm. But also, there hasn't been a Lumen course at Theory Underground and there won't be at least until 2026. So like that's not even something that we should really be spending a whole lot of time on. While it's fun to talk about, like when we're in the moment, especially when we're here in the live chat, when we're doing these streams, keep in mind your job as productive audience member is think about the next guy or gal or random, non-specified. Think about your future fellow traveler. If you have something to contribute, that's amazing. If you don't, if you just want to sit back and do the social thing, that's cool too. Keep in mind when you're just doing the social thing, there is a threshold and it's vague and it's unclear. And we will never entirely explicate the threshold because that's our fucking decision to make. It is entirely up to our discretion to say you're fucking up the show because we're the ones running the fucking show. So like we're not trying to be oppressive and we're not trying to be a wet blanket on your fire, but also we are being productive while we're here. And for the most part, most of you guys do a great job. I got to be honest. Over the last couple months, I have seen a market change in the live chats. The way we've approached and addressed the live chat has 100%. Been different. And you guys have also been doing your part as well. Mm-hmm. So while we do tend to focus on the negative stuff, those of you who are like stables of the chat, those of you guys who are commenters, who are sharing shit on Substack and other places, like you guys are kicking ass. You guys are doing a good job.
You guys are.
So, yeah.
Good job, guys. Good job, guys. And also good job to the people who kind of are able to be good sports about being made examples of by my rants. Like there's a kind of person who's got the you understand it's performative but also I just need to say a thing and so I'm using the opportunity to say it versus the person who's like, oh, it really is deeply about me and my interiority. No, I don't know who you are and I don't know your deep interiority. And eventually, maybe, hopefully, but there was a time when Nance was just an avatar.
Just a name in the live chat.
Yeah. We're recording now. I started this episode without announcing that we're recording it, but we're going. We just started at some point along the way, so.
That's how we do, because we're rebels and we don't follow your rules. So this is a short episode of what is currently writing under the moniker of self-legitimating Johnsons.
But we're here to rebrand, baby.
There have been some developments in the world of self-legitimating Johnsons, and they're exciting, and we wanted to share them with you all. But I don't know, is there anything else we want to get to first before we talk about why we're excited about the naming convention that over here at Theory Underground? Because there is a naming convention that was implicit, and today we kind of made it explicit, at least between ourselves.
Let's assume an audience of people who don't know about the first 2 episodes of SLJ, and for those who didn't see, what is that, 6 plus like 9 hours worth? If you didn't see the 9 hours of our podcast so far, then you don't know about the struggle and you don't get the joke that is the working title. The working title of the podcast as Self-Legitimating Johnsons. It's a joke, and it was a working title. But if you don't get it, let us explain it to you real quick. Basically, just this. Who are we? Who are we? Who am I? I have a thought, but who am I to give you the thought? Now, when Nance says that, and he's been the guy who says that a lot. Now, we all think it, but Nance objectifies it. Like he'll be the person who says it. It's a good question, but also it could become a thought-terminating cliche. If all you ever do is think too far ahead or not far enough, you're thinking immediacy versus utopia, and you're never thinking about 5 to 15-year kind of projects, right? Then you're fucked. And the same thing is true when you're like in this crisis of legitimation saying, who am I to say these things? But I want to say it from my chest, right? Yeah. You want to say anything about that crisis before I go on?
No, I do think it's healthy and actually very productive and very generative to carry this kind of methodological naivety. It goes beyond humility. Like it really is like an active debasing of the self and the certainty and the certitude. I like to get a little Cartesian when I'm making sandwiches. I don't know. I am a little out of it, so that kind of doesn't make sense. But Cartesian sandwiches. No, but it is also very, very, very easy to take that too far, and that can becomes, like, for me personally, that becomes the post hoc justification for this form of writer's block that ultimately comes out of a lack of commitment, a lack of discipline, a lack of whatever. But it becomes a post hoc justification to not do the thing, because it is true that I know I'm a good fucking writer. And in fact, I know I'm a better writer than a lot of people. And I know that. However, I don't write very much. And often the justification is, well, who am I? I'm just some fucking guy. But that's bullshit. And like you gotta be a discerning person, and you can't allow that question to become the justification for just not doing the thing that you feel called to do. Because that's the loop you get caught in, right? You feel called to do something, but you allow your fucking drive to get in the way of it, and you're like, well, I'm just not going to do the thing. But then years down the road, you wind up hating yourself. And you're like, oh, I fucking hate myself. I'm such a piece of shit. Like, you have the opportunity to do the fucking thing. So don't let this question of who am I stand in the way, because if you are hearing the call, and it's a genuine call, and you're answering the call, it doesn't matter who you are, because in the doing of whatever you have to do to answer that call, the question will be answered. And that's never a question you can answer for yourself anyway. And this relates directly to the self-legitimating Johnson, because the question of who am I and who are we is not one that we can answer. you, the world, you, not you specifically as a concrete other, but in general, the world has to answer the question of who are we. So while it's an important addition to the method, you just don't want to be too cocksure. You don't want to be overconfident. It also becomes the dead end, the thought terminating fucking circle jerk, pity party. Woe is me. I'm such a sad little wiener. Get over yourself. Fuck you. That is a fucking narcissism. You expect the world to answer your fucking questions because it's a demand, right? That's a demand for respect. When I'm saying who am I, that's me saying I'm dissatisfied with the level of fucking respect and recognition that I feel like I have. Look, and it's not always this, but it can become that. So it's a slippery tightrope that you got to walk, and it helps to be doing it in a milieu with others, with trustworthy others, not in a fucking room on the internet by yourself all day long, every day, and then you turn into some fucking art fag. I don't want to just be an art fag.
Not just that. Yeah. I want to also be other things.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I believe that there's no way out but through, but I believe that there's a way for us. There's a way. Okay, so this who are we and why us question. So Theory Underground officially has two imprints that have been rolled out recently. Self-Legitimating Johnson's was done before we had an official name, but we have Why Left and now What's Right. That's not going to get confusing.
Is the other one
at
public
all.
yet? Oh, no. The other one's not public yet either.
No, don't talk about that one.
Yeah. Well, shit.
What?
It's gonna make more sense when all four are revealed.
Okay. So right now we can't tell you too much. Why us? Why us is all you need to know.
Yeah.
Nance and I, we have a podcast. It's called Why Us. And episode 1 is what we're about to premiere in its entirety, parts A and B. I say stuff in the second half that I feel a little uneasy about saying publicly, but I don't care. Also, the most important challenge ever made in the history of mankind. Not humankind, I mean mankind. A challenge from one man to another man to man up and do something crazy. The biggest challenge made in the history of mankind gets made in this. I mean that history up until now has been leading up to the challenge that I double dog dared Nance to do in part B of what we're about to premiere for you all. So that's very exciting. I'm very excited about it. And I don't know how much more I would want to say about any of that. I kind of don't think I need to. Nance, if I have the time from you before rating it, I think we could read something that I want to read with you. But if you're too sick, we'll fucking do it later. So.
How long is it?
It's that Jonathan Latham. It's that Jonathan Latham piece called "The Ecstasy of Influence."
That's actually not super duper long.
It's not that.
I mean,
it's not that long.
We tried to read that. We've tried to read this piece a few times.
It's really pressing on me right now because Nance and I are playing with a new genre of music.
Dude, it's so fucking sick, guys. It's so sick.
No. It's lame. It's fake and gay. No one will like it. I promise.
Oh. Okay, yeah. It sucks. We suck.
Only we like it. It's only good for us. It's only good for people who have the ear to hear.
It's music for those who have ears to hear.
There you go. We have been saying that. So, but Nance, you'll know why I want you to have processed this so bad once we actually get into it. So if you're down, we can do it.
Let's do it.
All right.
Let me make another tea really quick.
Yeah,
Okay.
everybody, I'm going to play the PSA that I didn't allow to play after the episode I just did with Benjamin. I'm going to go ahead and roll it, and we'll be right back. Right after this. Don't go anywhere. If you do, we'll beat you up.
Stay glued in your seats, guys, fellas, folks.
Drink water, shower, go on a walk. You can listen to multitask,
Yeah.
I promise.
Take a walk. Get some headphones. Take a walk.
All right, here we go.
You can support the
I'm
free
gonna go make some tea.
at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon. But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars. We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's fault line theory. You know, the CCRU versus Ljubljana School, or Žižek versus Land. And of course, how he brings those against one another and then transcends them through other thinkers like Baudrillard, who he'll be teaching an intro course to in 2025. All of us are teaching stuff in 2025 that rhymes or argues or goes together. And so the best way to accelerate your development getting into theory right now is to just become a subscriber at TU. Just go to the website, click get involved, and I'm gonna look, this, what I'm about to play for you all is a really special moment from our documentary that we're working on. An interview where Benjamin explains why he's supporting Theory Underground and getting involved as a active member here at the core of the teaching team.
Yeah. So the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university. They criticize the left. They don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube. And they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you aren't in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor, this idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people, and then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. You have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or, steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism, actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced.
Hold on. Here we are. We're back. It got a little weird because it got the screen. Okay, hold on.
The screen share? You want me to just stop
we're
sharing?
good now. No, we're good now. So go ahead and say it. Yeah.
Okay. So I get custom skateboards. I got a homie who runs a press. So I get custom skateboards. They're cheaper that way, and I get to do cool shit. I get to put some of my photos on my skateboard decks, and it's really cool. And last year I designed one and they canceled it, and they were like, yeah, something's up. We can't do this. I was like, okay, no problem, whatever. And then like last week they sent me an email and they said, your order's on the way. I was like, that's weird. I haven't placed an order in a while. And then it just got here today, and I had the box sitting here in my office, and I was going to open it later. But during our break, I figured I'd open it up right now and take a look and see what it is.
Can you stop sharing? Stop sharing for a second. I want to see both of us here.
Yeah. So, I want to see your reaction too. Let YouTube see your reaction.
This is React content. Yeah.
So, this.
Oh my God.
That's what a box of boards looks like. Cardboard box. They come in 10 in a row. But if you guys can see the design, it says Theory Underground, Human Futures for All.
Oh my gosh.
That's my dog and Dave's cat riding a unicorn.
Dude.
So Dave's going to have one of these that's going to stay in pristine shape, hanging up in the office. I'm going to have one in pristine shape hanging up in the office. And maybe we'll make some available to some of our super friends.
Nope. No pristine shape for me. You have to put it to work. I like I like the version of the Nance board where when my friend who knows how to skateboard looks at it, he goes, "Who did that? Who did that?"
Yeah. Dude,
which is what happens. That is what happens.
That's so sick.
Like this one.
Yeah.
Nance
That's the first Theory Underground model.
It says Theory Underground.
This
you see
is
that,
number
guys?
2. Human Futures for All. That's sick.
That's freaking.
So that was just like a
awesome,
a tangent. I go through skateboards. I go through a lot of skateboards, by the way. People thinking 10, that's a lot of skateboards. Yeah. They last me about maybe a month if I go easy on them.
Can you share me the link of the article that we're about to read?
Yeah.
I'm starting another stream for it.
We're
gonna rate a short episode for that. Doesn't make sense for us to read this at the end of Why I Left. It makes sense for it to be a standalone episode.
So while we're still getting ready, I just had to say, dude, I'm so excited for the turn. I am so excited. In the group chat we have going on, that's Benjamin, you and myself, like we're having such good conversation right now that we wouldn't be having the conversation we're having were it not for being in response to this piece that we're going to go over. So like not only, I don't know, I'm just, yes, Hodbob, that is an AI generated image. Unicorns are not real. I did not get a photograph of a unicorn.
The difference,
But I can see how you would wonder, because I could technically, I guess, edit a photo of a horse to look like a unicorn. That is something that could be done, but no, I just had the algorithm do it. I am a photographer, but I am not a purist. I don't hate AI generated images.
well, maybe you should. What I hate, what I hate is just going across like just like scrolling down on Substack, and all I see is like first attempt Mid-Journey generations being used as thumbnails. And if you look at Theory Underground's art when we use AI versus anyone else when they use AI, the difference is that theirs was a first attempt Mid-Journey, whereas ours is synthesized and blended with a bunch of personalized stuff. So like every one of the thumbnails you've ever seen at Theory Underground, I made. Okay. Mm-hmm. Unless there's one that I'm forgetting about where someone else made it. I've made all of them. And you know, it's not my main thing. It's not my identity. It's not like, you know, it's always just kind of like either, oh, I know how to do this basic, and I'll do this basic thing I know how to do, or I'm going to get creative and have fun today. Like the thumbnail I made for the first episode of What's Right is a fun episode. Especially the thumbnail I made for the first chapter of The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. I was having fun with that one. It's very obvious. Anytime there's laser eyes nuking something, you know I'm having fun. And but it's not just fun. It is like practicing, like you're trying to find a vibe, and you're trying to meet somewhere between, you know, the message and the vibe. And you know, so it is artistic, but of course it's not from scratch. It's not from scratch. I'm not a from scratch kind of artist, and that's what Nance is ultimately saying right now.
Here's the deal, dude. Nobody is, right? We always use tools.
That's what we're going to go talk about. That's what we're going to go talk about right now, guys. Right now.
Yeah.
Right now. We're going to go do the stream right now. We're about to raid you out right now. So if you're with us and you have auto play currently working, then you will be with us in a second. But if you do not have auto play currently working, then you will need to click a button to come over into the audience. I know I messed this up yesterday when I tried to make it work. So today, I hope it will work for you all. Okay? So it's called Why Us? Episode on the Ecstasy of Influence of Plagiarism by Jonathan Latham with Dave and Nance. It's not going to be a very long reading, but it'll probably be one of your favorite articles you've ever heard in your entire life, I promise. Okay? So with that, we'll see you all there in a minute. All right? Peace.
Peace, yo.
Let's make it stop saying incoming and make it say... thanks for tuning in. Have a good night. Except don't have a good night. Go do the raid, folks.